Hey, everybody. Welcome to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today we have a great, kind of an extraordinary panel here. We got Grant Cameron, who is a longtime researcher and author, UFOs, very nuts and bolts at the beginning that shifted over more to consciousness. As you can see, he's Canadian and proud of it in the freezing cold weather, even though you got palm trees in the back. And we have Dr. Joseph Burkes, or more properly, Joseph Burkes, MD, who's been a long time researcher in the field. Both Grant and Dr. Burkes have had experiences and have worked with experiences over the years, and what Dr. Joseph Burkes had dubbed the Contact Underground. So welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.
At our age, we're glad to be anywhere.
Yes, sir.
I joke, I'm a millennial, but I'll say it's 2023. I feel the same way with the current state of the world. You know what I mean? It's like a few years ago. And actually, part of why I'm doing all this, because I was looking at the way things are going. And I'm like, wow, I don't know how long, things are going to be going on the way things are. It's pretty crazy out there. So I wanted to start off. People are going to be familiar with you guys here, and I want to get straight into some deep topics. But just to preface that a little bit, Grant, you have something you call the theory of wow. So can you just give a brief summary to the watchers and listeners of what the theory of wow is?
It started, let's see. I guess it goes back to the very beginning. The second night I had two close encounters, one after another, about 2 days apart. And the second night it was just sort of flying away, and I was just sort of sitting, looking at it flying away, and it was just sort of pulsing as it flew off into the distance. And I was going like, but what's it doing? Like, why is it in this little tiny town in the middle of Canada? And I was just sort of thrown by that. And as it went along, I started to look at different examples that seemed to indicate that maybe what they're doing is just trying to get our attention. And I guess one of the best stories that happened to me was the thing was on the ground. The reason I went out was because this TV studio got a film of this thing jumping off the ground. And I remember talking to the camera editor. He was a film editor. He never shot a camera before in his life. And the TV station had said, nobody's going out on, no more overtime. You guys can go out on your own if you want to chase a stupid UFO. And they went out. And I remember he was looking through the viewfinder. He was about 8.25 miles away from this thing. And the thing would glow up and glow back down. And then it was like, he said, well, they almost got it the night before. I better get something on film. So he says, if it glows up again, I'm going to shoot. And it was almost like the UFO said, are you ready to shoot? And because as soon as he pushed the trigger, the thing jumped into the air. And that is exactly the same as the Nimitz. So in this case, it went 3 frames of film, 24ths of a second. So 1/8 of a second, it jumped about 5,000 feet in the air. And if you take a look at the Nimitz thing, I always ask, like with the Nimitz thing, why did it drop from 80,000 feet down to sea level? I mean, was that a pre-abduction maneuver, or what was it? It's like they're just showing off. Like they sat there for a whole week waiting for the Nimitz people to pick them up. It's like, here we are, come on over here. And then as the fighter jets went, and I'm sure they sent Zogar off and said, hey, Zogar, make some big bubbles under the water. They're coming, here they're coming. And then the pilots fly over and say, oh my God, look at the bubbles under the water. Something's under the water. And it's just this thing where people are repeating this stuff, and it just sort of raises consciousness. It just gets things going. And I even have, I did an interview last night with Jimmy Blanchette. I say it's probably the best interview in 50 years I've ever done with him. And again, you have this sort of idea that I think I've changed it a little bit, in that he's taking a look at the UFO photographs and the videos, and he's seeing that they're actually communicating through these videos. And now Bob McGuire, the scientist from the Institute for Defense Analysis, has bought into this idea, and you see the mathematics that he's produced is just like unbelievable, like defining how everything works, how you get the speed of light, and how that affects the atom and the weight of the atom and all this kind of stuff. It was just like, I was just like blown away by all the mathematics this guy's developed by watching these videos and by them feeding stuff. So that was the whole theory of wow, is people think, oh, you know, they're here to do this, they're here to do that. And if you start looking back through history, you see, like, before 1961, there was no Greys, there was no reptilians before 1980. In the old days, there was, you know, guys walking around in bubble helmets and just bizarre stuff. And it's almost like they're morphing. They're playing this little game, and they're sort of dropping these breadcrumbs. They're not telling you directly what's going on, but indirectly, and they're making us do the work. But if they wanted to land and tell us what was going on, they would land and tell us what's going on. That's not what they're doing. They're doing it indirectly through symbols, right brain symbols. So that's what they're doing. And you start looking at, you know, why would they you know, make crop circles, and whether they're, you know, hoaxed or they're not hoaxed. Everybody goes, oh my God. And the people are just like, all they can talk about. And you see over and over again, or why do UFOs have lights on it? So I would say the thing, like, if you look at a former, another civilization, perhaps it is, even though now I'm not sure it's another civilization, but you get the grade 1 class. They say, well, we've got these people, they're about to blow themselves up. They're at this critical stage. What do we can do? And the grade 1 class says, well, I know what we can do. To get their attention, let's put lights on these crafts and fly them around. And it's the old deal. Like, why do UFOs have lights on them? They don't need lights on them. And it's like, you start wondering, like, why do they put symbols on people's arms? And everything you look at, you start realizing, like, maybe this has nothing to do with anything except just to get our attention and to get us talking about it. Because it's like African-American rights or gay rights or whatever. The more people talk about it, you can make all the bad jokes and all the bad movies you want, as long as they spell your name right. They keep talking about it. Eventually people are going to make the right decision. And I think that may be all they're trying to do, is to get us to realize that we probably aren't alone, and that it's more complex than we think it is, and we don't know everything that we think we know.
Yeah, and you know, I'll just say, that's very much into the trickster element that's talked about by many people. And Jacques Vallée talks about the absurdity and how that kind of fits into the control system, where, I mean, it could seem from one perspective that they're kind of leading us on in different ways, and just like by defying what we consider consensus reality.
The only thing I would change on that is I would take Jacques Vallée's absurd, but the trickster, when you use the trickster, then you're getting into the evil aliens. Then it's like, oh, these bad guys, look what they're trying to do. They're trying to screw around with us or whatever. And no, they're just trying to get us to pay attention. And that's the way you do it. And everybody that's had a dramatic UFO sighting or an encounter, you know, I mean, you end up getting divorced. It's like near-death experiences. 75% of people get divorced because you just go down the rabbit hole. You can't get out of the rabbit hole. Your world is turned upside down. You can't let it go, and this kind of stuff. And so I would say it's more absurd rather than the trickster. I don't like the term trickster, because it feeds into this idea that we're up against some sort of demonic force that's messing with us.
It's been used like that, but I mean, the trickster, I don't know what you want to call it, ideology. I mean, that's got throughout all of history, and, you know, ancient Greek and Egyptian, you know, we have the friend, you know, the Hermetic penetrator and Hermes and all that, the trickster god. So, you know, that's riddled throughout our culture. And you know, all words, they're going to have some kind of connotation in the way it's used by certain people, but I understand what you mean. Dr. Burkes, do you have anything to say?
The idea of putting forward, staging situations that are absurd has been discussed by Vallée in The Invisible College. And he said that that element serves a function in terms of discrediting the phenomenon itself, so that when witnesses try to explain what's happened to them, they're being set up for ridicule. And what he suggested was that this allows the authorities, who are dead set on maintaining the status quo, to have an out, to not thrust into people's consciousness in a very forceful way the reality that we're not alone, that these intelligences are very advanced and they've been here influencing us. So it's a kind of this self-discrediting mechanism that's part of the long-term process of acclimatization that Brent has written about and is so important.
Yeah, but I would say that it's the more the discrediting. It gives the skeptic an out. I don't really see the government, but it gives the out to people, because the way we do it is we say we're here to bring you freedom, democracy, Jesus, McDonald's, and this is the way it's going to be. And next thing, people are pointing guns at us and telling us to get the heck out. And I think it gives the out to the skeptic. It's sort of like it's moving slowly. We've got eternity to figure the thing out. So it does give. I agree that it does give the skeptic an out in terms of not believing the thing. And it's not like they're trying to convince everybody of anything. They're just slowly moving it along. And it's almost like Max Planck says, you know, science advances one funeral at a time. And, you know, the new generation is not offended with the idea, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So in regards to that, it's not exactly the same, but I see kind of correlations a little bit to Dr. Burkes's virtual experience model. So for people watching, listening, Dr. Burkes, can you explain what the virtual experience model is?
This was something empirical. It was hammered home to me from the very start of my contact activism. And I consider myself a contact activist, but for an intense period of 5 years in the 1990s, I was a volunteer contact worker. I was going out as part of the CE5 initiative. I had a team that was organized ostensibly by myself and Stephen Greer, but really it was the intelligence behind the phenomena that set up, because within a very short period of time, we had a very high-powered team. It was unique in that we had 3 physicians, 2 PhD psychologists, a 747 pilot, as well as several private pilots. And so this group, supposedly brought together by chance, was really a staged event through a series of synchronicities that I believe non-human intelligence facilitated. And during my first week of going out in the field in September of 1992, while driving home, approaching the freeway, the 405 freeway, which is often described as one of the largest parking lots in the world because traffic is so dense. So I'm getting on the freeway and I see something that we might call it an impossible aerial phenomena, not unidentified, but impossible. I saw a small plane made out of wood. It was maybe 15, 20 feet. It had a single engine in the front. It was painted fire engine red, and it had gold lightning streaks. And it was doing about 60 miles an hour. And the wings were less than 6 feet, I mean, less than 8 feet on each side. There was no way that that craft could stay airborne at that slow speed. And so what they were showing me was something impossible, and they were doing it as a, shall we say, imperative, because over the next 2-3 years, contact event after contact event demonstrated that what experiencers are seeing in the field are not necessarily physical objects, but they're either holographic-like visual displays that everyone can see who's assembled, or they target the neurosensory apparatus of the contact experiencer individually, so that 1 or maybe 2 people will see the craft, alleged craft, air hypothesis, and everyone else may not. So they were giving me a kind of show and tell as to how they use illusory mechanisms as a tool for engaging humanity.
Yeah, I think everybody's starting to move that direction too. I was just talking to Ray Hernandez, and both he and I and Chris Bledsoe all had this dramatic experience in 2012. Mine was the download experience, and Ray had the healed dog, and Chris Bledsoe had the encounter with the lady. And we've all gone that direction where I don't think any of us now really believes this is any sort of ET anymore. This is much more complex than just something coming, and it goes to me, it's like what I mentioned before we started, was this idea that I was given in 2017, where it said, if the world is made out of little nuts and bolts, which we assume it is, it's a material world and all this kind of stuff, then that's one world. But if consciousness is primary, which Max Planck, and I realized that all the early quantum physics guys all were realists. They all believed that consciousness was primary and that consciousness created matter. And so if consciousness creates matter, they can create whatever they want. And that's the idea, is that you start realizing that this is way more complex than what we think it is. We want to sort of like put the last piece of the puzzle in, and we're sort of egotistical. We've got it all sort of figured out. And the more I see of it, the more it starts to look like what you're describing is something that really may not be physical. It may be something they can create, because if it's all made out of consciousness, it's like the idea that God doesn't create the heaven and the earth. We're the ones creating the heavens and the earth. As John Wheeler, the famous Princeton physicist, said, there's no out there out there. And you get this idea that consciousness may be what it's all about. It's all consciousness. There really is no physical world when you break it all down. It all breaks down into an underlying consciousness. And they know how it works, and we don't know how it works.
Yeah, and I think the UFO phenomenon has the ability to act, and actually to operate in all these different modes and levels. So I think that they could operate strictly in a mental realm, consciousness, or at what people call astral realm, as well as physical. And I don't know, who first brought up some of the terms, but like, or even if you want to go with the Vedic idea of thought and form and thought form,
Yeah.
If you have mastery of consciousness on that level, and you could, consciously construct something and then 3D print it in some kind of really advanced technical way, or even in a mode of consciousness that we don't understand yet, but is a technology nonetheless, those kind of things. And again, with all people's types of experiences, the kind of level of, capacity or potential that the UFO phenomenon demonstrates is, almost beyond what we can conceptualize.
Or it may even go to ourselves. I have a friend here, a big business guy here, that had two very dramatic sightings, one with his wife, and his wife saw something completely different than what he saw. But he had a very high level psychic who was one of the people that was working with the guy who ran the remote viewing program for the US Air Force. And he talked to her, and he said, well, where were they from? I had these two UFOs. Where were they from? And she said, what do you mean, where were they from? He said, well, where'd the planet they come from? They didn't come from anywhere. She said, you're the one that sent them here to wake yourself up. And he went, I did. And that's the thing. We may be behind it. It's this consciousness thing that, again, it goes back to this idea, is it one life or is it multiple lives? If it's multiple lives, then we came into this world and we sort of understand how the rules work coming in. And it may be us that are creating our worldview around us to learn certain lessons or whatever. There may not be, as like John Wheeler said, there's no out there. And then you get the people. I just finished this book about the UFO sky pilots, the people who are flying the craft. And Joe gave me the 747 United Airlines pilot. And you get that sort of thing where people are told it's within you. Go within you. That's how you get there. And then as soon as they imagine it in their mind, suddenly they're there, and it's all done through consciousness. And you start wondering this whole idea that, is there any out there? As John Wheeler said, there isn't. It's a participatory universe. Or Greer uses in his meditation, you see yourself as a puny form when within you the entire universe is enfolded. And it may be that kind of thing. It's all within us. There's no out there. It's all consciousness. And we're creating the consciousness. And that may be why it starts in 1895 with wooden ships and guys hanging off of ropes and with beards and all that kind of stuff. And you see it progresses. It just keeps changing. And you have the Foo Fighters, and then you have the green fireballs, and then you have the Damsky crafts. And then then the triangles come along, and the beings change from one type of being to another type of being. And you start realizing that this is much more complex than just some alien species. Even when I did I took all the grays one time, and I put all the grays together one after another on a PowerPoint and flipped them very fast. And there are no two grays that are the same. It's like you start looking at people's drawings, they're completely different than somebody else drew. And you start wondering, what's really going on? Are we creating this, or is this some sort of outside force? We like to believe, because we want to be victims. We want to believe there's an outside force that's messing with us, and we have nothing to do with it. And it may be that there's no outside force. We are the ones that are running the whole show, and we're responsible for whatever happens and is happening around us.
I think we should step back for a moment and talk about the implications of what this means. We have a hard enough time within the UFO subculture to explain that this subject is real. And during the last 5 years, great strides have been made, in part because an authority figure, the New York Times, and now the government, has carried out confirmation that this subject is real. But the vast majority of people within the UFO subculture, the fans, and even within the contact experiencers, continue to think of this as primarily a physical phenomena. So how can you imagine we are going to explain to the larger society that most sightings are probably not physical, that they're either holographic illusions or neurosensory stimulation of the occipital lobe? The enormous gulf between our understanding based on experience, intimate experience with the phenomena, and the larger society that has been denied its history, let alone understanding the mechanisms of contact.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's like, and that may be one of the reasons why the government may be backing off telling the story, because I mean, it's bad enough if you're going to say, okay, we got some ETs here, but if you're saying this is total make believe, and we have no control over this, and it does what it wants, and we have no clue how it works. I mean, you get on pretty soft ground there in terms of the fact that the more I look at it now, the more I think that the stories of Eric Davis saying, in 1989, they shut the whole thing down and they take it off the shelf every 7 or 8 years and still can't figure it out. And that seems to be more and more the way I see it, is that it's going to be very, very complex, 1,000 times more complex. And it's going to be hard enough to sell the idea of, ETs, let alone the idea that it's, the computerized world, a simulation theory, all this kind of stuff, and that's where I think they may be doing we talked about this disclosure. One of the reasons why I think they're doing the disclosure right now is they're trying to drag in the white world to look at this problem, because they can't figure it out. They have no clue what's going on. And if they can get the white world, all the guys, it's all going to get sucked into the black world, and we're going to be helping them because they can't figure it out. So they make these initiatives for people to work on it and say, yeah, it's real, and everybody starts working on it. And then as soon as you step on something that makes any sense, they come in with a national security order and say this is classified, and they take control of it. And that's why I think they're doing partly the disclosure now, is they can't figure it out, so they're trying to drag in other minds to help them figure this thing out.
Yeah. Go ahead,
Since we have you, Grant, I'm curious what you think of the latest office of the Director of National Intelligence, because we should be we should be up to date, and that came out just 2 days ago as time of this interview. So what's your thoughts about the numbers have gone from 157 to unexplained to over 500? Could you comment on that, please?
Okay. Well, to me, it's a diversion. I mean, it's a total waste of time. We have to start talking to the people who are talking to the intelligence. This thing, we're sort of, it's like we've confused UFOs and government and Santa Claus. We think that somebody's going to give us this thing. They're going to tell us what's going on, and they have no intention of doing this, because, as you would probably know, it's all got to do with lead time in weapons. They want to weaponize this stuff. They have no interest in. It's like the idea that Bush told Jimmy Carter, curiosity is not sufficient need to know. And Dr. Eric Walker said to us at one point, he said, admit it. You're just curious, admit it. And I'll tell you what, curiosity is not sufficient need to know, and why should we change the rules to satisfy your curiosity? So I say we're even worse than Blue Book, because in Blue Book, at least you had the shape of the object and you had the UFO report. Now you don't have the UFO report, and you don't have the shape of the object. Say, well, that's classified. The shape is classified. So what do we got? We got numbers, and everybody's sitting there waiting for the next little drop to come, as if they're going to tell us. And we have to get past this waiting for Santa Claus, the government, to give us something, and to realize that the people that are on the people that are interacting with the phenomena will start to tell you, like your experience with this thing, that this thing couldn't have flown. You start looking at that and you go, you know, if Joe's right and Joe saw that, then what does this mean? If the thing couldn't fly, I mean, is it actually a craft? What's going on? And you start to think, and that's when you talk to people who are having the experiences, you start to realize that this kind of stuff can't be happening, and that there's something messing around here, and it's got to do with this consciousness thing, that everything is very pliable, it's very plastic. And so I think we're just, to me, we're just wasting our time by waiting for the government to give us something. And all the answers are, if there's any answers to be found, they're with people who have had direct encounters with it. And they'll say it's anecdotal. Well, it's all anecdotal. I mean, everything comes through the subconscious mind, and you speak it out. You can't prove anything you got either. It's all anecdotal, but you have to eventually start to listen to the people, and they have so many answers. Like when I had the Sky Pilot, I kept it very secret. I would come to you and I heard that Joe had that dream thing that you'd gotten, and I put these together, and Gary Nolan said 1 case is anecdotal, 2 cases is evidence. I had 36 plus cases, and I've got 6 more since, of people who flew the craft, and they all said this exactly the same thing. It was this consciousness thing. And when you see that, you got 36 people all saying the same thing. It's time to start paying attention to, what is this really going on? Is this really a craft? Are they really flying it? Is it, and it makes you wonder what's really going on, or the idea where the other thing I found when people had the experience is the flying the ship, is they all say the same thing. And I didn't go back and ask them the question, because I didn't know what questions to ask until the very end. And one of the questions I would ask was, when you had the experience, when you suddenly could put your hand on the panel or put your hand on the ball or whatever, could you see in 360 degrees? And everybody will say the same thing. Oh yeah, I can see in 360 degrees. That's exactly what out-of-body experience people and near-death experience people say. Oh, I can see in 360 degrees. And you realize that. Or they have the thing where Hal Puthoff said, I would really like to know, how can the craft be bigger on the inside than it is outside? There's so many of these case reports where people say, I was inside the craft, and the one guy was taking photographs. It was a 30 feet across, hanging from a cable, from a crane, and he went inside this thing to photograph the panels, and he said, I could have taken a football and thrown it in any direction and not hit a wall. It was so big on the inside. People said it's the size of a football stadium. And the beings say, we can make it as big as we want. We can make it as big as a solar system if we want. I mean, that kind of stuff. This is not the physical world. This is creating stuff out of consciousness, and they have the ability to make the craft as big as they want or as small as they want. You can have a little rock on the side of the road, and you go there and there's a civilization inside that rock. I mean, that's the kind of technology we're looking at here in terms of what it is. And the whole physical notion of this whole thing, just the more I look at it, the more it crumbles every day, in terms of the fact that this probably is not going to be very physical. It's going to be a lot more spiritual than people think it's going to be. It's going to be 1,000 times more complex, and it will not have a hint of capitalism. That's my conclusion to this whole thing.
Yeah, well, and also that kind of dimension thing that you're referring to. I mean, there's plenty of reports of orbs. You have like a tiny baseball or basketball size orb that expands into this huge football field type craft. But I just for the kind of, let's say the confirmation initiatives, we got the report. The report is kind of actually the result of last year's language, and they're kind of outlining what they now are responsible for, and the whistleblower immunity and stuff. And I want to say, we're experiencers and people who have been researching this are, I mean, they've done that 30 years ago, that whole thing, but I do think it is important on a collective level. I think we have to be kind of patient with the public. I know how that sounds, but we do. I don't think we can expect everybody to just jump into, like, say, this conversation, right? But it's these kind of initiatives have allowed people like Dr. Gary Nolan to step openly and talk about, his personal experiences.
However, in a classified setting, and that's the whole thing. It's going to go in the
Well,
black world.
It's
I mean,
right. Well, some of it for sure, right? Like he's definitely
yeah,
done
all of it. Anything that's classified is going to be, he can't
right.
talk
Yeah,
about
yeah. No,
anything
no,
that's
no.
classified.
But what I mean is, it's allowed a Nobel nominee to come out publicly saying he's an experiencer and
Oh yeah, it raises
saying,
consciousness. Yeah.
and saying that this is real, saying the phenomenon is real. There's a lot of, and he's talking the consciousness stuff too.
Yeah.
So it's, these initiatives have allowed this topic to become a serious consensus reality conversation. There's still some stigma, but we're definitely in a different kind of environment now when talking about the UFO phenomenon. And as for experiencers and researchers who have been into this for a long time and are like so over it yesterday, it is important to bring the general public along, and we're going to see great progress with that. Even if you consider like the 100th monkey effect or morphogenetic field effect, the more people that are consciously involved in this subject and contemplating it and actively participating, the greater progress we're going to make. So I do see those initiatives as important.
Absolutely. And there's safety in numbers, not only in terms of the initiatives that are coming forward in the public arena, but also the number of people who are interested in what is popularly known as CE5, or what I call human-initiated contact events, or Mission Rama, the network of Peruvian contactees starting in 1974 called Encuentros, encounters. The number of people wanting to do this work is growing, and it's important that it be done in groups. Individual contact experiencers have a role to play, their testimony. You have multiple witnesses reporting on their interactions. It demonstrates that humans can take the initiative in terms of furthering along whatever limited relationship we have between our culture and what clearly are advanced non-human intelligences that may have been here for a very long time, waiting for us to reach out to them.
Then kind of, while I have both of you guys on here, I did want to bring this subject up before we move on, is prime contactees. So, that's I think an interesting subject, and you kind of touched on it there, because there's a lot of people who do have solo kind of interactions, and actually leads often to those individuals getting groups of people involved.
Sure. Am I on camera now? Because I see.
Yeah, you are.
Okay. So the prime contactee profile was something, again, that came in the course of being an organizer of human-initiated contact events. What I found was I had reached an impasse. After doing the work for about a year, we had some interesting sightings in the field. And I was in Mexico, where we had this very dramatic encounter with a large triangular shaped craft that blocked out the sky and signaled at us. But in terms of my own development, psychically, spiritually, I had reached an impasse, and I needed help. Well, help came in the form of two modalities. One, I had a boost in my own psychic abilities, where I started having what was popularly known as contact downloads, actually interacting with the intelligence mentally. On two occasions, they gave me advance notice in terms of field operations, when, where in the sky, and the number of craft that were going to show up. I shared that information in advance, and sure enough, as I had been notified, the encounters unfolded. But also it came in the form of a special individual that I call Misha, who surfaced in my emergency room. He was from Belarus, Russian Jewish, and he grew up in the part of the world where my grandparents on my mother's side came. So we were both Jewish. We were both in a healthcare setting. And I remember the first thing he said to me when we first met, and I told him, I spoke Russian, I studied it in college. He said that, he asked me, what did I think of extraterrestrial life? And at that point, I'd been running a contact team for probably a year or less, and I wasn't sharing openly with everyone in the hospital. So I made some nonchalant, well, there's space is so big, it'd be a terrible waste of space if there was another intelligent life. A year later, he comes back and tells me who he is. He's a lifelong contactee, growing up in backward Belarus, in a working class family. As a teenager with no parental supervision, he starts studying yoga and achieves very advanced stages of non-local consciousness. He starts having multiple sightings that he and others can witness. And he was a veritable human UFO magnet, sort of like, or very much like what Stephen Greer was in the early years of his operations, his CE5 initiative. When I went out with Stephen Greer, the first 2-3 years, every time we went out in the field, with maybe one exception, there were anomalous aerial phenomena that satisfied the definition of UFO. Well, now I had a little Stephen Greer in the form of Misha in my contact team. And as soon as he joined, level of sightings went up. It was associated with the boost in psychic ability that I described. And as I was very excited about the prospects of facilitating other contact teams, I became an organizer. And I was working in full-time in the ER. I was trying to help my wife, help raise the 2 kids. But I was out there in terms of wherever I went, I would talk about the phenomena, and I could stand by a person and wait to decide whether it was safe to talk to them. And if the green light went in my head, I'd start talking about UFOs. And sure enough, they'd had a sighting. They had even other types of contact experiences. So I became an organizer in the initiative, and I helped facilitate the creation of other working groups, not just my local team. And I started finding other people like CSETI director, like the man I call Misha, who, again, with no adult supervision, as usually as a teenager or a young man or woman. There was one woman. Most of the guys I worked with were, or most of the contact activists I worked with at that time in terms of being primes were men, but there was one woman who gave a very dramatic explanation about the consciousness. I said she had these incredible videos. She was British national, living in Ontario. And she had these incredible videos of UFOs over Lake Ontario. And I said to her, how did you get these incredible videos? One was a golden UFO that was hovering by a distant shore. It was probably 200 feet across. And she said to me, oh, it's very simple. I go to this broad daylight camping spot. I turn on my video camera, and then I go to sleep, take a nap. And they paraded in front of her camera. Well, that's a consciousness connection. That's amazing. So I started developing a profile, and the prime contactees are people who have a lifelong history, usually starting in adolescence or early adulthood, sometimes childhood, of having numerous sightings. They are trained by the intelligence responsible for the phenomena in advanced psychic techniques that facilitate communication. And then they get the desire, a sense of mission to find other like-minded people to form contact teams so that other people can verify their special connection with the UFO intelligences by having the UFOs show up when they're doing field work. So this was the genesis of the prime contactee concept. But I have to state that once I put that forward, it was not without controversy. And here we have the inevitable ugly head of ego rising, because I was looking for these primes, and there were people who were part of contact teams who said, well, this is elitist. You're trying to praise the prime contactees, which are, so important, and you're diminishing the contributions of all of us other contact workers who don't necessarily fit exactly the profile. And one UFO group, I was actually compelled to leave because they were all attacking me as being elitist, because I wanted to utilize this capability. And what I found was that the prime contactee designation is just the tip of the iceberg. And this was hammered home in 1990 2007 when I was in UK, and I was looking for organizers for the CE5 initiative. And I heard about this guy, I'll call him Joe, who had been leading teams outside one of the major airports, and they were interacting with UFOs, that was Gatwick, by camping a couple of 1,000 yards past the last runway. So the jets were taking off from the airport, and there would be UFOs there for whatever mission, and he would signal at them with what he called torches, because they're Brits, not flashlights.
Yeah.
And when I first met him, I said, this guy, you must be a prime. I said, do you meditate? And he said, no. I had expected to see some new age type of guy when I heard about him and talked to him on the phone. Turned out he was a butcher. He looked like a rugby player, was built like a fire plug, all muscle. And I said, well, do you like to listen to new age music? No. What do you do for fun? He says, I watch the telly with my friends and we drink beer. So I said to him, but you're going out and doing this contact work and leading teams? I said, yeah. I said, you don't do anything? What about yoga? And he said, well, now that you mention it, he said when he was 14 years old, like many teenagers, he would stay up late at night and watch television till the test pattern would go on the TV. It would be like snow. And so one morning, he's in front of the TV on the couch, and he finds himself in full lotus position. And I said, oh, you were studying yoga. And he says, no, I've never studied yoga. In fact, I didn't even know what that position was until I saw it on a newsstand in a yoga magazine. And I said, you were doing full lotus, yet waking up at 3 a.m. and not knowing that you had initiated yoga practice? He says, yes. So what I realized was that, like I said, the prime contactees are the tip of the iceberg, that consciousness mediated communication is going on with a very vast number of people at a sub or even unconscious level. And the activists that I was recruiting to our network manifested a multitude of levels of conscious awareness of their preparation, their training for the field investigations we're doing. So that's in a nutshell what prime contactee means.
I can maybe add a little bit to that, because I had that's why I say, like, in terms of what I do is I try to find these people, because if they're have this direct contact, I mean, that's where you're trying to get. And one of the ones I had, and that was early on, was Chris Bledsoe. In 2012 I met him, and Chris Bledsoe, he tells the story. He just recently told me the story. He said he had all these intelligence people and military people around his property or whatever, and he said to the one guy, he said, okay, now I need to know, like, so why are you guys all here? What's everybody doing on my property? And the guy said, well, he says, it appears that they like you because they're in touch with you. They don't seem to like us because they don't have contact with us. So we've come here to find out what they're trying to tell you. and the other ones were the ones with that you had, the Mission Rama was I had contact with Ricardo and Enrique, and they had these. And I remember I asked them. I said, did you meditate as a young kid? And they go, yeah, 13. And I'm going, how many 13-year-old Chilean kids, they're playing soccer or whatever, how many are meditating? And these two guys both started meditation at a very early age. Or even James, you can tell the story where John Burroughs was, and I'm pretty sure it was Kit Green, where he's dealing with him about his situation, and Kit Green, who's, you see him as this CIA guy who's into science or whatever, he tells him to meditate and do yoga. And then when I asked John, I said, did you actually do that? And he said, yeah. And I said, did it help? He said, yeah. And so you get the idea that these people on the top, they know some of this stuff. Like, why would you advise some guy to do meditation and yoga if you're just after the scientific facts? They seem to know this part of the thing. And that's what I agree that you'll hear Whitley Strieber and all these people talk about. And I had the two of the people who'd flown the craft told the story about being as young children sitting in circles, and they were taught to levitate these balls, 3 different color balls. One was easy, one was sort of easy, and one was really hard. And you get this whole thing that these people are there, and when that's why I have the objection of waiting for the government to tell me, is that I go to these people, and I think it's much more useful of my time to talk to these people, because they at first they don't want to talk. And I always tell them, I say, well, even for your kids, why don't you just record it for your kids? And what I find is with all of them is that the minute they tell the story, they suddenly become messiahs. I mean, it's like they want to tell everybody and they can't shut them up and whatever. And they go from the closet to, the opposite extreme once they realize that they think they have this sort of mission. Or I'll ask people, do you think you have a mission? And they'll usually say either, well, yeah, I think so, but I really don't know what it is. Or yeah, I got a mission and I know what it is. And so I think it's just fascinating that you and I are sort of on the same page in that thing, that there are these people out there who, if you spend some time around them, you can learn an awful lot of material as to what might be going on.
Yeah, and the what Kit Green.
I like to say, once you join the Contact Underground, you may never be lonely again.
Yeah.
Because once you're incorporated into the network of contact experiencers, you may go on furlough for a while. It may go away or get less intense, but they never quite leave you alone. And this is sometimes reassuring to people. Sometimes it's not. But this is the level of commitment that these intelligences have. They're not going to bug off. Whether the national security state likes it or not, these intelligences have been here for a long time. I'm of the opinion that they're on a helping mission. And because I was active in various peace and social justice movements in the 60s, civil rights too, 60s, 70s, 80s, I see the possibility, the potential that this subject could actually be linked to possible solutions for the seemingly insurmountable problems that face our culture. But first, we have to break through the UFO truth embargo. People have to have the confirmation that this is real. And it's the role of experiencers and contact activists to send the message, not only is it real, it's really important, because the future of our civilization and the solutions to major problems may be intertwined with what the contact experiencers are undergoing.
Yeah, and I think we have to remember that we have we are part of the phenomena that we're observing. And so when people get into the whole evil alien thing and the grays and all this kind of stuff, I always say, I defy you to go to Mission Rama or to go to CE5 and find anybody who had contact with a gray or a reptilian who had all this kind of stuff. You basically find this sort of a different type of being. And to me, it's almost like John Mack said to Bud Hopkins at one point during a debate in Boston that's online. And he said, Bud, it's really strange. He says, I'm the psychiatrist here. You think I would be getting all the real bad ones, he says, and I'm getting all the spiritual seeking ones, and you're getting all the bad ones. And maybe that has more to do with you and I. And so that's where I think is this input thing, where especially when you look at the Mission Rama thing, you see this very strictly type of being that makes contact. It's very angelic. It's a spin-off from their very, religious, Catholic, and that incorporates into what happens. And that's why I say that we are part of what we're observing. We want to do the separation thing. We're the victim, and this is happening to us. And I always go back to the thing that we are part of the phenomena that we're observing.
Yeah, and again, just for reference, like the Kit Green exercises that he mentioned to John Burroughs were Vipassana and Krapulya yoga, and those are things you can Google. And it's funny to that actually is that there's an actual scientific paper out there on those two practices combined and how it affects the brain. And I believe Beverly Holmes posted a link to that on Twitter, and it's actual scientific paper looking at the paired practice of Vipassana, which is a Buddhist meditation practice, and Krapulya yoga, which is it's a branch of Hatha yoga that's very gentle but focused and relaxed. It has relaxing properties. So actually, after looking at those practices, and I've done a bunch of practices like that and still do, you could actually flip out the Krapulya yoga for Qigong, in my opinion, because it's very similar, or any type of asana paired with the Vipassana. Again, that's just for reference for people. And I think there could have even been a paper on there that said how practices like that affect the caudate nucleus. So I'm not sure about that. I have to verify that, but that's another interesting correlation because, everybody knows that Dr. Kit Green worked on the caudate putamen study with Dr. Gary Nolan. And another note about John Burroughs is, he was doing those practices and he ended up going out to Bradshaw Ranch in Sedona, Arizona, and having, pretty profound contact experience. And he's talked about that a little bit, but he won't identify. I think there was a kind of military or intelligence person with him present during that Sedona, Arizona contact event. That's just another interesting correlation.
Yeah, well, he's been in the military a bit too long. I mean, he even had the thing where the tape, where he had the regression tape.
That's
where
exactly what I was going to say.
He's actually talking to them in the regression tape, and I said, "Well, let's make this public." No. It's like, well, yeah.
Well, since
you're
it's
actually
not public,
talking to them,
it's not public, Grant, because he has referenced it, and although he hasn't released it, can you explain a tiny bit about the John Burroughs' regression tape?
Well, I just had my experience with it, that it was done according to Emenegger, who's just passed away. Emenegger said that they wanted to do a regression, and that he was working together with Alan Sandler. And Alan said, "Well, hang on, let me make a phone call." He makes a phone call, and he's got these two CIA psychologists that do the regression. And so then later on, that was.
You don't know their names, do you, Grant? The CIA psychologists who do the regression?
The name is probably there. Yeah, I could probably is around. I don't, not on the top of my head.
Send it to me later, please.
Yeah. So anyway, they had done it, and then it was going to be put in, and they pulled it from UFO Cover Up Live. They pulled it out at the last minute. It wasn't in there. And so the daughter of the producer, and his name is escaping me, he worked for Gray Advertising. Gray Advertising was always seen to be a front for the CIA. So Bob was working for Gray Advertising in Los Angeles, and the producer that was doing this show, UFO Cover Up Live, was working out of New York, out of the office there. And so they pulled it, and then they had all the tapes. And so the daughter of the producer phoned me up. She said, "Oh, I my father produced that thing." And she said, "I've got all the files." I said, "You do?" And so I went to John. I said, "Hey, John, guess what? The daughter of the producer just contacted me, and she's talking to me." And he said, "Everything she gives you, you immediately seal up. You do not look at it, and you give it to me." And then suddenly the girl contacts me back, and I guess John had contacted the producer, and he went to his daughter and he said, "What have you been up to? You just leave it alone." And that was it. But I almost had the tape. I would have had the tape, but John phoned the producer and killed the whole thing. But apparently on the tape, he starts talking, he starts channeling but you see that all the time, like, regressionists like, what's her name from Los Angeles always talks about that, where she always says, "Can I talk to the being? Can I talk to whoever you're talking to?" And then she tries to actually engage with the being rather than going secondhand. And she said most times they'll say, "Yeah, you can talk to the being." And so that's what happened there. John had this sort of a direct communication where he was talking, but nobody's ever seen the tape. John has made sure it's not, I guess he's going to make sure it's not going to come out. He just said, I guess he figured like he already looked like enough of a crackpot. And I mean, if this came out, then he would be totally written off as being insane.
Yeah. And, we did plan to kind of cover this topic a little, but, we know, Christopher Bledsoe has had a regression. Many people in the field have had a regression. Some of the regressions have been shared. Some have not. Even that individual, Mario Woods, who was an Air Force guy who had a contact experiences on a United States Air Force base with 4 hours missing time on the base at a nuclear facility, which has come out more publicly. Somewhere in the Skies did an interview with him, and Martin Willis, I forget, UFO podcast. What UFO podcast? He did an interview with him recently, and he was in the last episode of Unidentified, which, again, Lou Elizondo was kind of like the team lead on that. And the whole last episode was all about close encounters and contact experiences, and it involved missing time and so on. But I know, Dr. Burkes, you did have some concerns about hypnotic regression. So let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah, hypnotic regressions are probably a two-edged sword. On one hand, there's the promise of possible enhanced psychic abilities that manifest in hypnosis, or the promise that you'll be able to facilitate communication with non-human intelligences that you just discussed a moment ago. And then there's the problem with hypnosis as it's often practiced in the alien abductionist subculture. And the book to read, which is out of date and in many ways flawed, but still important, is Abduction Enigma. Estes and PhD psychologist and Randall were the authors. It came out around 20 years ago. And what they found is that there was definite evidence of the hypnotists leading their witnesses. And so it gets back to the statement we heard just a few minutes ago that John Mack would have subjects who would give very spiritual and positive interactions, and someone like Bud Hopkins, or that
David Jacobs.
Jacobs, their subjects bring out horrific stories of abuse, and so you can, without too much difficulty, show how people are being led, even when there's no overt tampering in terms of asking suggestive questions. Many of these people have vague recollections of what happened, the absence of memory. They then enter into a UFO support group sponsored by the hypnotist, and they share stories of abuse. And then they go under hypnosis, and guess what? They even though they can't recall exactly, when they're placed in highly suggestible states, which is what hypnosis is, by an authority figure, someone like Bud Hopkins or Jacobs, and we already know how they feel about contact. They basically focus on it as if it were a physical criminal act. It's not surprising. Highly suggested authority figure will be able to elicit horrific stories of abuse. And this is why when the Foundation for Research into Extraordinary Extraterrestrial Encounters did a very in-depth survey, which was reported on in 2019 with the book publication of Beyond UFOs. That study that had over 4,000 contact experiencers specifically asked people who filled out extensive surveys about their contact events, only include information and contacts that you recalled without hypnosis. This was an acknowledgement of the way in which hypnosis can be used and abused. And I say abuse because what happens is, if you have vague recollections and then you undergo hypnotic regression and out comes a fearful account, now you become someone who doesn't know what happened to someone who thinks they do, and you become a victim. And further hypnotic regressions reinforce memories of abuse that did not necessarily occur at all, but have been generated by the hypnotic process. So from my perspective as a contact activist, as someone who went into this process hoping that I could be contributing to a worldwide program of peace and solidarity with advanced cultures, and bring home those messages and contacts to the larger society, that level of abuse is not only pernicious to the individuals who go through their life thinking they've been violated, to also to the larger society that now sees contact within the context of a criminal act, when in fact, the number of people who are having positive encounters, as documented in the free study, far exceeds those who are having either neutral or very positive events. But if you ask people in the street what they believe contact is about, often you will get, oh, it's alien abductions. They're doing experiments on people and torturing. So when we approach hypnosis, We have to be sophisticated at how it's used, how it's abused, and the effect on the larger society.
Yeah, and to me, when I talk to experiences, you got to start asking them all the weird questions that nobody asked them, because people will say, you know, were you scared? Did it hurt? You know, this kind of stuff, and you're sort of going down that road. I always ask them the question. I say, hey, when you were on board the ship, did the alien have any clothes on? And they go, no. And I said, didn't you think that was kind of strange? It's the absurd thing. Don't you think that was kind of strange? Yeah, now that I think about it, that was kind of strange. I say, did it have any sex organs? You said it was a male or a female, and it said, no, it doesn't have any sex organs. I've never had anybody said they saw sex organs. And didn't you think that was strange? And it's like, yeah, that is kind of strange. And then you'd get the things where you listen to people, and if you've heard enough accounts, you start to realize that something totally different may be going on. For example, and that was an interview that James did with Jim Semivan, where I'm listening to Jim Semivan, and Jim Semivan is you know, he's the CIA guy. So it's sort of like, you know, I didn't give them permission for this, and you know, I'm offended that this happened, and you know, he's very upset and all this sort of stuff, and you know, violated his rights and stuff like that. And then at one point he says, and then James asks him, well, was there any telepathy? He's trying to get him to talk about his experience. Was there any telepathy? And he said, yeah, well, actually, now that you mention it, and he doesn't talk about telepathy, but he says, yeah, there was this entity standing behind me that had this guardian type thing going on about it. And as soon as I heard that, I went, that's Michael Newton. That's Michael Newton. That's the whole deal, that your soul guide stands behind you when you have these sort of experiences in the life after death thing, that people will report this, the being stands behind you. And when he said they had this guardian type thing going on, so he interprets it as a being, when in fact, I'm starting to think, well, maybe this is just his spirit guide, and he's interpreting it as a bad experience, when in fact his spirit guide is there, and this is a learning lesson or something like that. And so that's the thing, is people put on their spin of as to how they see it based upon, you know, as you said, like what the general interpretation is. And now it's sort of become the fact that people are being abducted. But back in 1961, the first abduction was actually Nancy Tremaine, 2 months before Betty and Barney Hill. And I remember talking to the Canadian people, because they were involved with that case as well. And the story was that Betty Hill went to Nightcap, and she said, oh, we were on this road, and they stopped us, and we were on board the ship and all this kind of stuff. And Kehoe, who ran the thing, basically told her to get lost. He said, absolutely no way are they abducting people off of roads. And we got to realize that before that thing, everybody thought it was Space Brothers, and they had suits on, they had long hair and stuff. And the phenomena has changed as we go along, and the phenomena is changing. It's not this one phenomena, and it's part of what we believe. And we've moved into the idea of you know, being victims of grays and reptilians. And I maintain that reptilians weren't mentioned until 1980, and now we're into orbs and the phenomena. It's almost like they're taking us through the pages of a book, and they just keep changing the whole thing, and we're not realizing. We just go according to what happened yesterday. And I've been in it so long, I keep telling people what it was like in 1975, and you were back almost not that far, but when you go back, people think it was always like that. It wasn't. It's a different world than it was back in the 70s or the 80s, of what we believed and what was going on. That it's a very pliable phenomena, and we are part of what we're experiencing, I believe.
Yeah, and you know, the kind of element of MyLabs, right? That comes up sometimes. And what's interesting about the MyLab thing is, you know, in the Wilson Davis notes, you know, it says there's no abductions. And then in Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science Volume 4, you know, Jacques is talking with Kit Green, and they're talking about abductions, and you know, Kit is kind of sharing his perspective and doubts, or saying, oh, it's military. And you know, and I'm not trying to diminish anybody's experience by any means,
Well, there's an
Um,
experience, but Kit Green, you
but
got to
no,
mention
but
Kit Green said there was no abductions as well, and so did Edgar Mitchell say there was no abductions. And there's an
so
event, but what is the question is, what's the event? Like Betty
w-
Andreasen has this 6 books written about her. She has this experience where she's on board the ship, and they take her here, they take her there, and then they take her back in this glass orb, the same as Chris Bledsoe, drop her off in the backyard. And she says, "Oh, I was so glad to be home. There was my trailer, and I went running into the trailer, and my husband was still sleeping, and I ran into my room, and there I was sitting on the side of the bed." And
yeah,
so the question is, what's actually going on? And the more you look at it, the more it becomes more complexing and more complex. It's not going to be simple. I absolutely maintain, and that's what I get out of the abduction thing, that people want to, if you believe in us versus them and enemies, you want military money, you're going to turn it into, the evil aliens, because that's your end result. But the Mission Rama is clearly Mission Rama and CE5. You simply do not get this kind of stuff with these people, and that's critically important.
yeah, and I actually do want to touch on that. But also what's curious about the MyLab thing is, and I made a few videos on this, and I included some clips. Seemingly opposing sides of the disclosure conversation.
Yeah.
Dr. Stephen Greer and Tom DeLonge. And Dr. Stephen Greer is very adamant about peaceful and positive contact, and Tom DeLonge, he doesn't emphasize it, but he doesn't deny the positive contact. He'll actually refer to it sometimes, but he often gets hyped up and excited about the negative contact, and that's kind of what he gets into. I think that probably excites his imagination, and I think maybe some of his advisors are talking about it. But there's video of Tom DeLonge talking specifically about MyLabs and his Secret Machines fictional books. There's an entire narrative that includes the MyLab conversation. And I don't know how much of this is coming from Tom DeLonge's advisors or his own private research. And same with Dr. Stephen Greer. It's just curious that these seemingly two opposing sides, who both have deep connections to the military industrial complex with these advisors that they have that are very deep in, to the core of the subject, are both
Could it be that
talking.
they're just being fed the same misinformation or disinformation, since they both have contacts? That's a gentle way of saying they're being used, manipulated, or source acting as agents of influence. So it would not surprise me, even though they may have opposite views as to overall intent of the so-called visitors, since they're dealing with executive branch intelligence services, translate that as DIA, CIA, and Office of Naval Intelligence, et cetera. They might come up with the same kind of disinformation about, oh yeah, these are MILLAB operations. So, I think that we have to really be very critical of those areas within the UFO so-called research community that heavily relies on hypnosis, and that goes across the so-called alien hybridization program, alien abductions, and MILLAB. The absence of physical evidence is something that should be addressed, and it's possible that when you have authority figures within, like Kit Green or Admiral Wilson, coming back and saying, after their high-level contacts have explained there are no abductions, they mean there are no physical abductions as a criminal act, but the psychic interactions galore are going on, in my judgment, nonstop. So maybe we should create a new term. Instead of calling it abduction, we should call it UPI, unsolicited psychic interaction. And the aliens are making UPI with us. That's very different. It's hard to become a victim. It's true, it may be pleasant or uncomfortable, but it's not the same thing as being physically violated.
Yeah. And again, you get, like John Mack actually brought up in his one book, about the fact that if you were very sort of negative and you were questioning, you would see a gray. If you were very sort of high energy sexual, you'd see a reptilian. And if you were very religious, you'd see like the sort of not the angelic beings, but the light beings. And this reflection. And the other thing that I have thought about often is that the phenomena may be again playing the same game, that they're playing this game, because one of the things that I found was that Jim Semivan said, he was talking to Melinda, and I heard the whole conversation. Melinda told me exactly what he said. And he said, I just can't believe this. I can't believe you'd need huge operations and money, and I would have known about this. And then you start looking at the weird stuff that happens around this sort of stuff. For example, you have the experience, and then suddenly there's a black helicopter flying around your house. And it's like, are they that good that they know that you got taken the night before? And people think they do. And yet when people show me photographs, suddenly I realized that they'd have a photograph of the black helicopter and had an orb in it. And then the next one, I got another one. The guy sent me, had an orb in it. So I said, has anybody got a black helicopter that they filmed that doesn't have an orb in it? Like, what's the chances you've got an orb in it? And I just got another one. And then you start wondering, is the phenomena playing this? Because if you're going to be negative, they'll give you this negative experience, and that's the way you're going to learn. It's like Barbara Streisand's stepson is a big time experiencer in California, and he said that what they told him is, when you come into your world, we have to use what's in your head, and whatever's in your head, that's what we use to teach you a lesson. So if you're into the negative, we're going to use the negative to teach you a lesson. That's all we can do. We can't put stuff in your head that isn't there. And that made sense to me, that there's this reflective element to the whole thing. That I talked to a guy from Sweden that runs he's one of the guys on the board for that big huge collection of material there, and he said there are no abductions in Sweden, and yet in Sweden you get these UFOs that are flying, and they end up in swamps, and they've got like hundreds of these cases over like the last 75 years, and you start wondering, like, what's going on? Like, we don't have the swamp cases, we've got the abduction cases, they don't have the abduction cases. The Mission Rama doesn't have grays, they don't have reptilians, they have these sort of angelic beings. And then I even had Nancy Tremaine, who I helped her publish her 2 books, and she was always talked about reptilians, because the being came, and the baby and all this kind of stuff. I won't get into that, but then at one point she said, she was telling her story in 1961, she's on board the ship. And I said, well, you saw Mr. on the ship. Was he a reptilian then? And she said, no, he was like a human being. He had like dark hair, and he was sitting at a panel. And I said, and now you say you're in contact with them, and now you say that they come as like energy beings. And she said, yeah. So this one person had 3 different beings. The being changed into 3 different things. And to me, it depended upon what her attitude was, what her state of mind was, what she was seeing.
I had a helicopter story that sort of reflects what you're saying, but in an opposite way, in that they were not black helicopters. They were candy colored circus painted helicopters.
Yeah.
It's right. Candy colored green. And what happened was, I think it was 94, I was talking to my prime contactee, Misha, on the phone. He says, oh, I had this encounter last night. This UFO was over the 101 freeway. I was driving, and then there were these helicopters that were going after it. I said to him, think about what you're saying, Misha. You have a flying saucer being pursued by helicopters. Do you know any flying saucer that can be captured by a helicopter? Can fly circles around top performance jet aircraft. I said that was a program visual display that was set up for you to match a flying saucer with something that's familiar, but both were illusory. So I was very proud of myself, and I got into my car and started driving on the 405 again to get to work. And as I'm getting to the Sepulveda Pass, I see a helicopter, except it's vintage. It's an old Sikorsky type Korean War vintage helicopter, where the pilot's up front and you got a bubble.
The mash gun.
The nose. And it's painted candy green. Okay. It's all the wrong colors. And I'm thinking, I just had a conversation about helicopters being a visual display, and now I'm having that visual display. And it's flying, not doing anything, of course, flying back and forth across the freeway. Then I see another Huey, another vintage aircraft from the Vietnam War era, and it's also painted wild colors. And this time I'm thinking, okay, if this is non-human intelligence, I'm going to try to interact. So I start chanting the slogan of our network at the time: one universe, one people. And the helicopter comes out, instead of crossing the freeway, comes down and leads me all the way down about 100 feet up and about 200 feet in front of me. And it leads me to north to go to work. The roar of that helicopter should have made the fillings in my teeth rattle. That it was the slightest hum. These are not helicopters. These black helicopters are not men in black. This is the intelligence saying, yes, we can stage illusory visual displays as a mechanism of contact. And your job, if you're brave enough and ambitious enough, is to figure it out.
Yeah, I even had one. I've never really mentioned it. I was with Stevensville, Angela Joyner. We were going to work on a book together. I was at her place in Texas, and her husband comes home from work and he says, "Come outside, there's a UFO, there's a UFO." We go outside. It's like plain daylight. And I don't even remember to this day what it looked like, but it didn't look like a saucer or like a plane or anything. It was just a weird sort of shape. And I'm sitting and I'm going, that's pretty weird. And I was just watching it flying towards Dallas. And then it sort of leaves the scene, and all of a sudden here comes the jets. And I go, I can't even believe this is happening. It's like the first jet, then the second jet. And that's the thing, is that we have to realize that this phenomena has tremendous power. And I think, to me, it's always teaching lessons. It's about something, and it's about us figuring it out. Because if they wanted to land and tell us what was going on, they want us to figure it out. That's what the theory of wow, it's they do these weird things, and you eventually, and when it comes to you, you go, oh, I see. And then you suddenly realize that this is maybe the phenomena, or even like, how many people see anybody being abducted? Like nobody. And so you got to start to question what's really going on here. And I've talked to the head of one of the guys I had, the pilot was a guy out of, he runs MUFON out of Japan. And he said he had 22 out-of-body experiences. He interacts with the Greys. He's on board the ship all the time. And he said that it's all out-of-body experience, absolutely every single. And he said the same thing. The crowd, they can make it as big. They put their hand against the wall. This book comes out of the wall. He's telling these bizarre stories, and that's when you start looking at it and seeing that it's much more complex. We always want to bring it down to this nuts and bolts thing. But the more I've looked at it over all these years, I mean, I'm with Chris Bledsoe and I'm with Ray Hernandez now, and with you, where I would be very surprised if this turns out to be extraterrestrial and maybe a higher vibrating intelligence that's interacting with us. But I'd be very surprised if it's some sort of human being that's learned, because if in order for them to get off their planet, they're embargoed the same as us. Until you learn the lesson of oneness, that we're all one thing, that everything in time and space is connected, and all these connections, you're not getting off the planet. You're not going to get this solution. All these people know the oneness connection. They know how to move from here to there, because everybody that flew the ship said the same thing. You think of where you want to go and you are instantaneously there. Everybody said the same thing. So it's the idea, if that's true, then there's something seriously wrong with our idea of time and space. We've got something wrong.
I think we have to offer an important proviso, is that there are profound physical effects that are associated with these psychic interactions.
Sure.
And this is something that became abundantly clear when, as part of the free study, Preston Dennett and I got a chance to review some of the 700 individuals who claimed that they had or someone in their family had a healing event in the course of their UAP interactions. And the physical effects are very dramatic. We had a case of a man who had a mass the size of your fist inside his right chest. Yeah. And he had just received the diagnosis. His name, Ray Hernandez is a friend of his. His name is Alberto Fernandez. If you go to my Contact Underground website, I have an excerpt from chapter 6 on Beyond UFOs, where I describe Alberto's not one, but two actual healings. And it was bad news for Alberto, because he had already have a previous malignancy. And now he's got a mass that's painless, large, and almost undoubtedly cancer. And he goes to his doctor, who says, well, I'm sending you across the street. We're going to admit you to the hospital, and we're going to you may have to have surgery to diagnose this. In any case, this is very bad news. While he's in the X-ray suite, he's getting a repeat X-ray, because the X-ray from his private physician is the property of the practice. So they're going to repeat the X-ray, and a specialist was called to, after the repeat X-ray is done, to admit him to the hospital and get a biopsy made. While he's there in the X-ray suite, His wife, a PhD psychologist, was accompanying him. He was separated from her by one of these screens that are attached to the ceiling and surround a patient for privacy in public areas like an X-ray waiting room suite. And while he's waiting for the X-ray to be done, he starts shouting, "Ellos están aquí, ellos están aquí," they are here. And his wife saw what looked like a sine wave pattern, like an energy field, was manifesting on the curtains that surrounded him, and as if he was engulfed in some kind of energy that was actually moving the curtains in a sine wave pattern. She rushes to his side, and he's shaking violently. And when he calms down, he says, "Ellos me curaron," they cured me. So they repeat the X-ray. And the specialist is called, and he's furious. He says, "What the hell are you wasting my time? You know, I had to break clinic to come down to admit you. There's nothing wrong with your X-ray."
Yeah.
This was very high probability malignancy in Alberto. He was a lifelong contactee, activist. I shouldn't say lifelong, because he was actually, his first sighting was when he was a Dade County policeman, and then he became a special agent for the Drug Enforcement Administration.
Yeah.
A very reliable witness, as was his wife, a PhD psychologist with a clinical practice. So there are profound physical effects. Now you could say, what happened? What happened was possibly he was physically removed and returned so fast in the blink of an eye, healed, that these intelligences can manipulate, as Jacques Vallée has said, they can manipulate space-time, and they can use the power of consciousness to rearrange the molecular patterns that we call the physical body, and they can heal and do astounding things because they are using technologies which are not based on a materialistic paradigm, but on a paradigm that acknowledges and uses the principle that consciousness is primary. How do they do it? They do it with their minds.
Yeah, and that's where when you study someone like Alberto, because he had the apport stuff going on as well, stuff manifesting and stuff like that. That's where you start to learn stuff by going there, as you do with other people who you meet in the field. And I'll give you an example. You mentioned a health case. This is not exactly the health case, but I just put on my Facebook, this is, I guess, a week ago or so, I had a session with Kay Randall May, who is being used by Kit Green he claimed that she was 95 to 100% accurate as a medical intuitive, and he knew the material that she did, and he said she's between 95 and 100% accurate. He said, "I don't know about the UFO stuff, but the medical stuff I know." And I had just diagnosed last spring with the metastases of melanoma. So you would know from Stephen Greer and from Sherry Adamak and from Stephen Schiff, that's what they all had. And that was the diagnosis by an oncologist, a radiologist.
Sherry had metastatic breast cancer, not malignant melanoma.
Oh, okay. She had, okay, breast cancer. So anyway, so I had they clearly, all these doctors were saying, we've seen this, 1,000 times before. This is what it is, whatever. And I had a session with Kay Randall May, and this was 2 weeks after the diagnosis. She said, nope, there's no cancer. I don't care what they say. She was right. It took them like 7 months to figure it out. And it turned out to be a nerve sheath tumor. And I've got a few of them, but a nerve sheath tumor. And, but you see that kind of stuff that you start to learn, that you pay attention to these people, because there's a bunch of people running around who have some stories that will tell us a lot of stuff as to what's going on. I'll just do one more story, and then, because it's the most important story that I've heard in a long time, and that's Leslie Kane doing the whole thing with the physical medium, where the hand appears in front of her. And this is a New York Times reporter. And this is what I say to people, how this phenomena can come into this world and it can go back into the world it came from, where she's saying, and when I interviewed her, all I wanted to know is, Leslie, did that hand actually appear in front of you on that table? Yeah, I saw it 3 or 4 times. It wasn't just one time. And I touched the hand. I could feel the knuckles and the tendons. It was soft like a baby's hand, and it was warm. And she said it was an actual hand. And then it just went, and it went back into sort of like a water thing and disappeared. And that's the kind of stuff, when you hear these stories, and you put them together, you start realizing this is way more complex than people think it is. And the power that this phenomena, the intelligence, I call it the intelligence, whatever this intelligence has, is way beyond anything that we can ever imagine. And I think that's part of what the cover up is about. Even when Tom DeLonge talked about when he went to the Lockheed Skunk Works skiff, and he was talking to the head scientist, and the head scientist said, "How do they get here? How does it work?" And he said, "Oh, I think," because he was hanging around with Greer at the time, he said, "Oh, I think consciousness is involved." And then this head scientist said, "Now you're talking." And all he wanted to talk about for 45 minutes was consciousness. That's all he wanted to talk about. And so you see this clear thing that we're moving into this non-local conscious. How does the world work? How does is there a material world? The power that they're showing us, that it is not the material world we think it is, and that if we don't pick up the anomalies, we're not going to learn anything. We just refuse to believe there's these anomalies. And as Gary Nolan says, I'm interested in the 5% of the stuff that doesn't fall within the bell curve. Why is that happening? And when you get that, that's when you get the Nobel Prizes. That's when you discover stuff. Is if the physical world were the way people say it was, these anomalies, these healings and stuff would not be happening. They're happening, which means you better start to learn stuff from what's actually going on.
And instead of demonizing the intelligences behind the phenomena, they should take, humanity should follow what you just suggested, and that's pay attention. You just might learn something. And what we can learn is that these intelligences, as you stated before, if they did not embrace a paradigm of oneness, they would never have been able to get here, because whether from another dimension or a star system, they would have self-destructed long ago, as our civilization sometimes appears it's headed to do. So what we need to do is let them teach us. And this was the message I got in October of 1993. First time that Misha joined us in the field, I was at the level of consciousness I was told was like a knowingness. It wasn't a voice in the head. It was like you said before, 2 + 2 is 4. How do you know that? I just know it. It's true. I knew that they were going to show up at 2 a.m. And the message I got from a being that appeared in my consciousness as a gray, an ancient being who was writing hieroglyphs on a tablet. He said to me at the level of knowledge, "You're a young race. Then soon after that, you have a lot to learn. And finally, several hours later, and we're going to teach you." So this is the message of contact. Rather than seeing this as a threat, we should see this as an opportunity to grow. And perhaps in the process, we can save our civilization by gaining the wisdom and the determination to change our very childish ways.
Amen.
Well, and I wanted to actually get into this aspect of the acclimatization. We discussed that before, of, kind of society being acclimatized to the UFO phenomenon. Kind of, and the interesting part of that is like the idea of us being acclimatized to the UFO phenomenon by in some regard, the people who are withholding some of the information, the gatekeepers, control group, and the funny part of that is that they don't have all the answers, right? But they're still attempting, it seems, at least some of them. I think there are different factions that represent different groups, and they have different agendas, and they have different belief systems that taint what they think the UFO phenomenon is, how they think it should be dealt with and handled. So if we get into the idea of, our society being acclimatized to the UFO phenomenon, it being more broadly introduced as part of consensus reality, part of the conversation, unstigmatized. What do you guys think of that? Let's start with you. Yeah, Grant, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I got an interesting angle to this. I was, because I'm doing a lecture on this, but you interviewed Jim Semivan. So Jim Semivan was, upset about his encounter. He says it's not an abduction, but, it seemed like it was pretty dramatic, whatever happened there. And so I would say you take a look at his situation. He said that he clearly went to all the top guys in all the 3-letter agencies and said, "We're going to drop this thing." Now everybody's retired. That's how it works. You retire and then you can do what you want. We're going to drop this thing. You guys can't get it out and we're going to do it. My question is, would Jim Semivan ever have done that if he had not had the experience, if he'd not been abducted? So maybe the whole thing, you start looking back and you go, oh, this was a good thing, because basically that's the whole deal, is he was coming out because he wanted to know what had happened to him. He wanted to get some answers and he was pushing, and so he came clear. So I think that's what a lot of the climatization is. It may not be the big guys, because I still think the big guys are going to suck up everything that comes down the pike as classified. They're going to put it into the black world. I think it's the people on the outer edge. And even Jim Semivan said, do not expect anything to come out of these things. That's not going to happen. And but you're still going to learn from Jim, from his experiences and the stories that he's heard. But again, we sort of demonize these experiences with the beings, and even Jim demonizes his experience. And yet, when it come down to it, there would not be the disclosure we had, because it was Jim Semivan that I was told, who set up the New York Times thing. He was he was called the big man. I was being told about it in 2015, 2 years before they went public with this whole thing. I heard about what was going to happen, and Jim came in the spring of 2016, and so it's clear to me that the phenomena may give you experiences to get you to deal with it, to be the Messiah, to do whatever, and you can't get out of it once it's happened to you. I didn't choose to see a UFO. Most people don't choose to see it. It happens to you. You go down the rabbit hole, and then you end up being part of the thing, and you don't even realize that may have all been a setup. Like when this guy was filming this shot that jumped from the ground to 5,000 feet in the air, he said, "Oh, the next time it flares up, I'm going to shoot." And it was almost like the UFO said, "You ready to shoot?" And this is like 20 years later, 30 years later, when I'm doing the book, and I'm going, that wasn't random. That was all planned. And then I'm thinking, oh, that's why they wanted me out of there. And then it took me 30 years to figure that thing out, that the guy had never shot a camera before in his life. And he just happened to push the film as this thing jumped into the air, and got one of the most famous films of all times of this thing jumping into the air. So I still think that a lot of what's happening is the phenomena is, we maybe in part with us, that we are part unconsciously, we've come into the world to do something. You hear about the 3 waves of Dolores Cannon, that we may be a part of 3 waves that have come in to do this, and we've chosen to do this. And so to me, it's always comes down to, I'm not really too worried about what everybody else is doing. I sort of believe what John Lennon says, in the end, everything's going to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, it's not the end. That we're going to learn from whatever happens. Even if we destroy the planet, we're going to learn. It's all about learning lessons. We came in, and we must have come in to do something, if reincarnation is a fact, and all we're going to do is figure out what we're here to do, and are we doing it?
I think it's important to acknowledge the limits of our power. And when we say we are going to destroy the planet, I think we should realize that this planet has withstood eras of catastrophe that would make of global warming, which was a man-created catastrophe, like a walk in the park. So our planet has tremendous capacity to regenerate life. This was a channeling experience that I got when I was meditating in Carlsbad Cavern. And what I believe is that our desire to protect our Earth Mother is so great that we imagine that we're going to destroy the planet. We may undermine the physical and biological conditions for our civilization to exist, but our planet without us will go on. And I suspect, even with the destructive weapons that we have, nuclear weapons, even with the possible terrible consequences of global warming, large numbers of people will survive and will repopulate the Earth and will learn from the mistakes. Our job, however, is to prevent the destruction of our civilization and not waste this enormous human experience that has brought us to this stage. So I prefer not to use the word destroy the planet. We may undermine the basis for our civilization, and we will degenerate into chaos and possible barbarism. But still, life will go on, and there will be opportunities for consciousness as well as humanity to evolve.
Yeah. The Canadians were told that they would stop a nuclear exchange, and they talked about this Tyla, a being by the name of Tyla, who was cleaning up the nuclear radioactivity associated with the atomic tests. And so Wilbur Smith back in the 50s was pushing the atomic thing. The thing is to get almost like the idea where when it really gets bad enough, then we'll do something. It's Jim Semivan talks about that. We're always like the government. We wait for something to happen, and then we try to fix it. We don't really try to fix things before they actually take place. And so that's like almost the idea that God created pain for a reason, and when the pain gets big enough, then people will make the move. And so in the end, people complain about pain, but I mean, it may be the best thing that's happened is that it wakes people up in terms of realizing what's important and what they should do.
No pain, no gain. So.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
I did want to talk to you guys about contact work and contact groups, and kind of how over the decades it's some of the phenomenon and the contact experiences have shifted, like both in the early days of Mission Rama and South America and Peru. They were having these extraordinary encounters, some allegedly face-to-face, Zendra portals, high-level contact. And even in the early days of CSETI, there were some, Dr. Burkes, you had that experience with triangular craft by the volcano in Mexico. And there were all these kind of extraordinary events. And even if you want to get into like the moment of contact that James Fox did, and you have the beings on the ground, and the Zimbabwe case in South Africa, Zimbabwe, where the entities are down on the ground with the children. There's over 60 witnesses. I think now they said there's actually over 100 witnesses. So what do you think that relatively speaking, in the early days, there were those kind of very kind of in your face contact experiences, and now for the most part, at least as part of the collective discussion, there's less of that kind of activity with contact?
I've thought about this question a lot, because as a team facilitator, organizer, I was always looking to push the envelope, more teams, higher levels of contact. And clearly, in the 5 years that was the most intense part of my volunteer activities, the opposite occurred. As time went on, manifestations seemed less frequent with less sightings, the enthusiasm of my team, understandably, wanes. I'm willing to accept that, these were programmed, as Mission Rama says, and we had a limited mission with limited success. I think, however, it's important to note that there's the issue of interference by the intelligence services. At one point in my work with CSETI, the CSETI director asked me what I thought of having retired military people as part of our contact network and having members of the team. And I had been an activist in various peace and social justice movements, liaison in Latin America, where the American intelligence services had a very dark history in terms of supporting military dictatorships, overthrowing governments and things like that. I told the CSETI director, Stephen Greer, you're certainly free to incorporate these people, but when you do that, that's the end of my participation in this project. And sure enough, when I started talking to people who were working with Rama, these were not from Peru, these people from Puerto Rico. And I mentioned that Stephen Greer had met with the CIA director. It's like the look in their faces was not very positive, and they didn't return my phone calls after that, okay? And one of these people actually helped me get on a television program speaking in Spanish to 500,000 people, KMEX, which is a big television station in Los Angeles, talking about our encounter that we had in the Mexican volcanic zone. So the Rama people I was in communication were very well connected with media. They were sophisticated, but they wouldn't return my calls after I mentioned what happened in December of 1993 when Stephen Greer met with the CIA director. So, and you have to also acknowledge that why do they follow us around? As Grant said, because one spokesperson for a member of the intelligence services reportedly said that the beings, they don't like us, meaning the intelligence service, but they like you. And so we had a constant issue of surveillance and sometimes even harassment of our contact teams, which is going to be a factor. The military-industrial intelligence complex is a great employer, but their job is to figure out ways of killing people and smashing things. And we have to acknowledge this. You want to call it politics, you want to call it ethics, you want to call it a contradiction. There's a contradiction between doing contact work and facilitating the acquisition of knowledge that may not be for some very positive purposes. So with that in mind, I worked with individuals who were specifically told, or in one case specifically told, not to have any association with a known contact group. And they mentioned CSETI. Another individual broke off from Rama. And because for whatever reason, but he was offered to have an onboard experience. So what I'm suggesting to you is that we talk about the development of contact in terms of group process, we're talking about what is being reported. What is not being reported, and I suspect there are large numbers of people who are in contact teams all over the planet who are being specifically told, don't have any contact with the existing networks. You're to work under semi-clandestine type of activities. And higher levels of contact may be going on without us knowing about it till the time is right. And I can't prove this. I'm not at liberty to share the names of the people who have been told this because they've been told this for security concerns. However, this may be, in fact, a part of the process. The public groups will only be allowed to go so far because we are penetrated, surveilled, whatever you want to, use the term. One Rama activist, actually several, told me about a woman who in the San Francisco area was Spanish-speaking academic type who participated in some of their encuentros and was, and after several months, she lost contact with the group. She stopped showing up. A while later, she showed up with them, showed up to the Rama people and asked their assistance and apologized. She apologized, according to these Rama sources, because she had been hired as an agent to penetrate the group and to report back to the intelligence services about what they were doing, which she did. But in the interim, she developed cancer. And because the Rama people were very spiritual, she was asking for them to pray for her, which they did. And as the story goes, there was a beneficial effect. So we cannot ignore these very real, down-to-earth consequences of associations with the intelligence services and their attempts to gain knowledge that may not be for the same reasons that you or I or Grant or anyone else is going out to make contact.
On this subject, I think I'm maybe in a different world. For me, it's gotten weirder and weirder, and the numbers of stories of very bizarre things. Like I did the book on people flying the craft. It doesn't get much bizarre than that, except for the book I did on weird, on the ports and manifestations. The experience I had with what they did to my PowerPoint in 2020 in Laughlin, Nevada. I've just never seen anything so paranormal in my life. Just weird stuff of people describing. I did the Mission Rama, the 2014 Zendra opening, 2015 Zendra opening, and the most bizarre story. Well, there's two. The most bizarre one with Mission Rama actually occurred in 2020 on the Sand Flats. Joe will know where that is, up on Mount Shasta. And that involved 9 witnesses who were levitated into the air. Well, first in the afternoon, they did a meditation thing where they put these rose petals on them and whatever, and they asked, can we film? And they filmed, and there was a looked like somebody in a robe in the trees that moved from one to the other. And in the second one, there was a reflection, a shadow off the trees. It was a very bizarre, and this thing had moved in like 30 seconds. And then that night they were having a birthday party at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you can't get more bizarre than this. They suddenly were up in the air. They were levitated into the air. Nine people from San Francisco, from Mexico City, and they were freaking out. They didn't know what to do, so they all held hands and they started oming. And the one woman was an intuitive. She said they're over in the forest. And then they said, how do you know? And well, this happened before they get levitated. She said, how do you know? It said, well, I just know. Everybody will describe that. Chris Bluss will describe that. I know they're here. I know that once you touch it, you vibrate with it, and you know they're there. And they said, I know they're here. And then they said, look, there's a light. And they said, oh, that's just a camp light. And she said, no, that's them. They want us to come over. And they said, well, we're not going to go over. It's like pitch black, where there's big holes in the ground where somebody's going to break their leg. And they say, tell them to come to us. And they said it sounded like a herd of elephants going across the field. This is 9 people, and they're coming across the field. And I interviewed 3 of them. We managed to get them on camera. They didn't want to talk. And by the time the interview was over, they're all fighting to talk about what had happened. And they're up in the air. They were levitated into the air. They were holding hands. They were oming. And Joe will know this. They said, oh, and we were talking and it sounded like we were underwater. As soon as they said that, I said, they're inside a Zendra, because everybody's been in a Zendra will say, it's you talk and it sounds like you're underwater. And they said, and they didn't even know, they just said, oh, it sounded like we were underwater. And we were levitated up and they were holding hands and they were oming. And then the being came, this Adama, who said he was going to appear. I was actually going to go, but COVID was happening, so I didn't go to this event. Adama said he would appear, and there was Adama with these beings. And I said to the one guy from San Francisco, I said, so how many beings were they? What did they look like? And he said, they were energy type beings. I said, how many were there? He said, there were as many beings as there was trees in the forest. And that doesn't get much more bizarre than that. And again, they heard that the CIA wanted to do a documentary. They wanted these people to go on camera on a TV show and talk about this. And as soon as that happened, they all just scattered. And they still have this story. One girl said she's going to write a book or whatever. But I talked to 3 of these nine witnesses. The other one is a video that I showed that was shown by Jimmy Blanchette last night on. I did an interview with him. It comes out of the Netherlands. You talk about a video, like she was told to point the camera at a certain spot in the sky, had a very not a very wide frame on it, and you could see the stars, and this thing is flying and it's changing shapes as it's going along. And then they do the mathematical analysis on these freeze frames of this thing. Just absolutely bizarre. So for me, when it comes to ports and people flying ships, and I do a lot of stuff on channeling, I maintain that I can tell if somebody's channeling or making it up. There's a very distinct pattern that they have. I watch a lot of that material. I've had 4 messages from aliens in the last 9 years where someone says, I got a message from these beings for you. And I go, really? You got a message for me? I've got 4. I mean, it doesn't get weirder. To me, I'm like living in the twilight zone of light language, where I started the light language thing, where these people started talking in tongues and orbs going around them and stuff like this. And I actually went to Thomas Jefferson University, who put people in brain scans when they're praying or meditating, and they can actually tell the pattern, what a meditating brain looks like, and what a praying brain looks like, and what somebody talking in tongues and stuff like that. And they said, yeah, we will take these people, we'll analyze their brains, because I was just floored by these people that talk these light languages. And I had like 24 of these people that were doing these light language things, and they said $50,000 plus expenses for 10 people. And I thought, well, I don't really have that kind of money. So to me, the world is getting weirder. I just can't get over how many weird things happen around me all the time in stories.
Could you share with us the information that we talked about before we started the video recording? I was very impressed when you had that 2012, I think February download, in which you realized consciousness was at the center of this phenomena. Tell us more about the major download that you had several years later, because I've heard you refer to it, but I've never gotten
Yeah.
the whole story encapsulated. Could
Okay.
you share that,
Well,
please?
I always like to point out the first one happened the same time as Ray Hernandez, who did the free survey with Edgar Mitchell. His dog was healed a week after my experience, where I got this. They put the three pieces of the puzzle together just like that. And I did a book called Inspired, where I look at Nobel Prize winners, and they all describe the same sort of thing. They're sitting on a park bench. They work on it. They can't figure it out. And then they're sitting there, sitting on a park bench watching someone play tennis. And all of a sudden, boom, it comes in their head. And they get up in the chair, they go running, and they know this is real. And they start writing it down. Or the Wizard of Oz, when it came instantaneously to the guy who did the Wizard of Oz, and he's writing on the back of envelopes as the stuffer, or the whole story with the Wizard, the story, the 7 books of the Wizard, whatever, that all came in a download. So people got to realize this download thing, when it comes, it's like I always say, the people who criticize you are the people who believe, because they've got nothing except they believe. And it's like, just keep that in mind, that you have no evidence. It's just your belief system. Put on a suit and go to church. I mean, who cares what you believe? The people who have the experience know. So I had this experience in 2013. It just blew me away. It was like, holy cow. I mean, I couldn't think for 2 days. And then in 2017, what I do for my contact modality, people use different ways to shut down the left brain. What I do is I walk. So I was walking downtown. It's about 6 miles. I had walked to McDonald's, had coffee. It was about 2 miles. And I started the walk going the rest of the way. I knew exactly what street I was on, exactly where on the street I was. And suddenly it came. It was like, oh, this is starting to come into my head. And I had a piece of paper. Synchronistically, I had a piece of paper and a pen, which I usually don't have. I pulled a piece of paper and the pen, and it started to give me these things. And basically what it was saying to me is, not only is what you've got wrong, it's exactly the opposite of what you think it is. And it was giving me these things. Is it this, or is it this? Is it this, or is this? And the key one was, is it a world made out of nuts and bolts? If it's a world made out of nuts and bolts, that's one world, and it's going to have certain rules and regulations. But if the world is made out of consciousness, which then makes nuts and bolts, that's a whole different world. And all the rules are going to change. And then it said, is it one life? If it's one life, then there's certain rules and regulations. But if it's multiple lives, you keep coming back, everything changes. All the rules change. Or is it separation or oneness? Because we all believe that everything's separate. We're just objects moving around in a meaningless time and space and this kind of stuff. And we're just robots and stuff like that. And it said, is it separation, or is it oneness? And so it was this, and these things were coming. And I'm madly writing it down. I had about maybe 13 or 14, and then it sort of faded away. It sort of went away. I put the piece of paper in my pocket, my pen in my pocket. I started walking. I took about 5 steps, and it started to happen again. Pulled a piece of paper, and I started writing again. And luckily, I wrote them all down. I think there's about 24 of them. And eventually I'm going to do a book on this experience. But the most powerful person, and I did this book on, I did all the stories of the Nobel Prizes and the inventions and the songs and music. And it's always the same thing, is when they ask them, where'd it come from? I don't know. It just came out of nowhere. It was there. And I knew, like Paul McCartney with the song Yesterday, he said he woke up in the middle of the night and the song was in his head and the piano was there, and he quickly played it. And then for a month, he walked around and said to people, have you ever heard this song before? He was sure someone had played the song. And they said, no, we never heard that song before. And then he had the second one, where it was a song called No Regrets. And he was playing with the Rolling Stones. And he said, I'm playing with the Rolling Stones. I woke up and he said, man, that was the greatest song those guys ever played. That was fantastic. And they never played that song. And he said he kept it quiet so Mick Jagger wouldn't come and get royalties. But you hear this over and over again. These people, it's like a download, it's like an experience. And the knowing is the best word for it. Almost like these people that in the UFO experience, 40% of all people, and I've talked to these people, 40% of people who have had the experience being on board or interacting with beings say at one point during their experience, and this according to the free survey, knew during their experience they knew the answer to everything in the universe. And near-death experience, it's 31% of people who've had near-death experience say at one point they knew the answer to everything in the universe, which means everything in the universe is there. There's no time, there's no space. It's all like a deck of cards on top of each other. You can access everything. And the idea is to get in the field and access the material and bring it back. And these people said that I'm going to remember this. I'm going to remember this. And they said, no, you won't remember remember this. Yeah, I'm going to remember this. And as they came back, it was like a dream. It just faded away. And all they could remember was at one point, I knew the answer to everything in the universe. And I say, that's not something, if you're going to make up a story, that's not something you want to put in your story to make you believable. That is just, it's absurd. It's the same thing. It's this absurd thing where, and I'll say to people, I ask them all the same question. I say, how do you know you knew everything? That's a lot of stuff. How do you know there wasn't number 6, 7, 8 on the far side of the universe they forgot to tell you about? And they say, what I would experience from 2012 and 2017, I'm not sure, but I just know. This knowing thing. I know what I, like, as you said, 2 and 2 is 4. I know, or I say, like, I can say to you, Joe, who's your first girlfriend? And a name pops in your head. And I say, are you sure that's the one? Maybe that's not. And I know who it was. And that's the thing. It's, certain things, and that's what these people maintain. And it's bizarre. So you see these crossovers between near-death experience, and then you take a look at experiencers. 37% of all experiencers have had a near-death experience. And most of the ones I've met have had 2 near-death experiences. And you start seeing, is this coincidence that the out-of-body experience is linked into the near-death experience, which is linked into the UFO experience? And you start wondering, is this all the same thing? Maybe it's all just a conscious play that we are all, as Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage, all the men and women are but actors. They have their entrances and their exits, and each man plays many roles. And this is the idea that we come in, that we are, the real I is not the puppet on the stage. It's the one that's watching the play, the one that leaves the stage. Or as Whitley Strieber's wife said, after he wrote the book, after she died, she came back and said, Whitley, I am no longer Anne, but I'll always be Anne to you. And to me, that simply meant she's off doing another life now. We played this role. I was Anne, you were Whitley Strieber. I'm off, and I'll always be Anne to you because we played that role. And that's the idea, that we are not the puppet on the stage. We always make the mistake that because we played King Henry VIII in grade 12, we suddenly think we're King Henry VIII. You're not King Henry VIII. You're playing King Henry VIII on the stage. And it's this idea that it may all be consciousness, that we're building these stories to learn and to make the world a magnificent place. So you do medicine, and people build buildings, and the world gets more magnificent and more intelligent and more bigger, and that's how the universe evolves and becomes grander and grander and grander, that we're all putting in. And the idea is to leave the world in a better place than it was when you got there.
Yeah, and
At the level of knowledge. You
Yeah.
could say information acquired at the level of knowledge. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
we're really on the same page. When I start looking at you and Ray Hernandez and Chris Bledsoe, I see this movement, and I think we're, as I've said a few times in the last couple of weeks, if I were to die tomorrow, I'd be fairly content that I got the answers. I was content with the answers I got. I may not know what's going on, but I'm content with the answers. Because that was my first question in 1975. What the hell is going on? Somebody's got to know. And that's why I chased the government, the president of the United States, and the CIA. Somebody's got to know what's going on here. And now I'm sort of, I may not be exactly right, but I'm somewhat content with what I've learned about what's going on.
Yeah, and even Dr. John Alexander's way into all this stuff. He's doing the spoon bending parties, the remote viewing. He wrote a chapter for the free book with Ray Hernandez. So yeah, that's something.
And then there's the funny story that the story I heard, he had talked to Jim Semivan. And of course, he was maintaining the government didn't have a program. So when Jim told him there was a program, he said, okay, so who's running it? And then Jim said, they are. And that's true. They're running the show. We're just sort of being led along and taught things, but they're definitely in charge of what's going on here. And anybody that thinks they can shoot them down or whatever, and that's when you get into this idea of the gifting field, where we think, oh, we're shooting them down and we got crash saucers and stuff like that. Then you get into this whole idea where Bigelow said, oh yeah, we got a Roswell crash, and I think there was one in China, and there was one in Russia, and there was one in South America. I think they're seeding them. And then Tim Taylor says, oh, he called it the gifting field. And when they go to the gifting field in New Mexico, they build an altar. And you start hearing this stuff and you go like, what the heck? These guys know something that they're not letting on. It's this spiritual component, this psychic component, mental component that you start to hear that these people know, but they're not putting it out. Even like the idea of the Wilson Leak document. I was horrified to find out that a bunch of these people had this thing 10 years ago, and we're sitting there running around in the dark, and then finally it gets leaked, and these people knew all along. And I knew there was a DIA document. I was told about a DIA document, and I guess sort of got kicked out of the club about the time I was going to get it. But these people, I think, know a lot more than what they're putting on, as you mentioned with Elizondo. And so I say, whatever you do, you may not want to believe these guys or agree with their take, but listen very carefully to these guys. Everything they say, parse it, because these guys let this stuff slip. They know more than you and I, because they've been in this group that have these inside contacts and stories and stuff like that. And they understand. I think they understand this component of the paranormal and the psychic aspect, or the consciousness aspect. Or even like Sid Goldberg told me the story that he interviewed John Alexander. They went out in the parking lot, and he said to John, he started asking questions about UFOs, and John says, "It's not about the UFOs, it's about the portal," and got in his car and drove away. And you hear that kind of stuff and you go, really? It's like, oh.
Try to imagine the consciousness of the beings who know that we have weapons that can shoot down physical objects, and allowed themselves to be shot down as part of the contact drama which is unfolding. What can you say about the consciousness of beings that are willing to sacrifice some of their own in order to help propel humanity on a path which I believe is very positive? That's something to wonder at in terms of sacrifice.
Yeah, and in the Wilson Leak document, they talk about the craft. Because when they had the no abductions, that didn't bother me. I said, there's an abduction scenario, but it's not what people think it is. And then the other thing they said is, we have a craft and we think it'll fly. And as soon as I heard that, I said, I know what it is. They were actually given a craft. This is the story. They were given a craft, and they can't turn it on because it needs a consciousness interface. They can't turn the thing on. So they've got the thing, and they say, we've got a craft and we think it'll fly, but they can't fly it. That's the interesting part, is that, and so that's why I see they're trying to scramble now to get the white world to contribute, because everything was so compartmentalized in their world that you may have a piece, I've got a piece, and I can't talk to you, you can't talk to me. And the black world wasn't getting anything done. So what you're going to try to do is suck the white world into this thing, and all these people are going to put up ideas and stuff, and the black worlds are going to go, thank you, thank you, thank you. And they're stumped. They just can't figure it out. And they're going to use the intelligence of the American intellectual academics to help them solve the problem.
Well,
I'd like to put in a plug for Managing Magic. For people who are listening to Grant describe this, his book 2017 goes into great detail, the 64 reasons why the authorities are unable or unwilling to reveal what they know about the UFO phenomena. Managing Magic is a very important book. And again, thank you so much, Grant, for all your wisdom, all your contributions to the field. But I'd like to ask a question, is if they've had such limited success, what would cause a prominent member of the contact community, Stephen Greer, to claim that in 1954, the United States government mastered anti-gravity, and that thousands, not hundreds, thousands of back-engineered or reverse-engineered craft exist all over the world on an underground basis? What might be the motivation for someone to feed him that kind of information?
Well, for Greer, I mean, he was a big thing. I mean, he was with CIA. He was trying to get a hold of Clinton, and he was pushing pretty hard to get inside. And that may have just been something to, disinformation to throw him off. I've always had trouble with the MILAB stuff and with cattle mutilations and stuff, that the government has this kind of stuff, or like Stephen Greer, they got the beings and they're abducting people, because it's always in intelligence, it's always, you got to take the risk versus the damage. So if you like mutilate a cow and you crash the helicopter, the government's going to fall. I mean, is it worth a cow to do this kind of stuff? And they're always going to weigh that and say, no, it's not really worth that. And the question is, if we had our most severe operations, our biggest operations were the killing of bin Laden and the rescue of the Iran hostages, and both times we crashed the helicopters. What's the chance you could do 10,000 cattle mutilations and not crash a helicopter, or abduct somebody and not crash a helicopter? I mean, they're crashing helicopters all the time, and the risk would be so severe of abducting an American citizen that the whole government would just collapse. I just can't see them doing it. That's where I start to think that it may be the intelligence that's playing this game, as we described earlier, that they're playing this game of adding on, military people inside the abduction experience, and it's all a big play that they know how it all fits together. And it may be a part of your intelligence or your state of mind, whether it's negative or positive, in terms of what kind of game they play for you. Because even the one guy, the main abductee, when he was talking about the guy that came up with the screen imaging thing, his name always escapes me. Early on, he was one of Bob Hopkins' guys, and he said that he was there and the military guy appeared in one of his abduction scenarios, and he went, "Oh, you're just screen imaging me. You're screening. I'm not stupid. You haven't even got the right uniform on." He said, like that, the uniform changed to the right uniform instantaneously. And that's the thing, is like, you got to realize that they may be playing this game, that it's all a game. It's all teaching us lessons. And they're, as Jim Semivan said, they're running the show. We play a big game, that we've got all this kind of stuff. So when Stephen says that, I mean, I've heard the anti-gravity stuff, but you think from 1954, there would be something that technology that we would see. I think they've got metal technology like the nitinol and stuff like that they've developed, that kind of stuff. But in terms of I always make the joke, and because my first exciting was a couple weeks after the end of the Vietnam War, and people would say, "Oh, that's the Americans were flying it around." And I always used to say, well, if that was the Americans flying around in Carmen, Manitoba, you think they would have done better in the Vietnam War than they did? I mean, it's sort of like we're still shooting people with rockets, even in what are we doing in Ukraine? I mean, it's, lob your big rocket and they lob their rocket back, and it's like old time technology. Where's this new technology? You'd think something would have leaked.
Similar question. What would be the benefit for the intelligence services to promote the notion that Stephen Greer has put forward since 1993? And that is, the president is out of the loop, that there's a cabal, which, by the way, is many of my Jewish friends protest, calling the evil machinations of a secret government the cabal, because it comes from the Kabbalah. So what would be the reason that someone like Stephen Greer would be told the president is out of the loop, when it shows that he was in the loop?
Yeah, well, if you look at Bush, when they asked Bush Jr., they asked him, and he said, "Oh, that's the same question my daughters asked me. So you're not going to, what do you tell your daughters? Nothing. What are you telling us? Nothing." So it indicated that he had done something. Same as Quayle said that when they were there, they spent a lot of time looking at it, and they couldn't figure it out. Him and Bush Sr. And then you got Obama said, "Yeah, I went looking for the secret." Were you turned away from it? No, I wasn't. I managed to get stuff. And he comes out and says, we've got these things, we don't know what they are, and it may be that it's so deeply held that it's like the idea that Podesta put a $600 billion budget, and there's a lot of holes in there where they can hide stuff, and unless you know how to get to it. So the reason that I think they would put the president out of the loop and lie about it is they don't want the president standing up and taking questions, because you can't lie. So then you're stuck in this box where you've got plausible deniability. So they may go to the president and say, "Hey, Joe, you may not want to know about this. If you really need to know if something happens as a crash or whatever, we'll brief you, but you don't need to know about this. You want plausible deniability. Just leave it alone, and we'll leave it at that." And people will take that. Because there's a lot of secrets that they know that they're not releasing, and every president plays the game. As I've said, like, people want to make it political, but there's been 7 administrations, Republican, and 7 Democratic administrations, and they've all done exactly the same thing. So it's this idea of even Truman talked about the fact that they talk to the military about it all the time. It seems to always be the thing that, yeah, they're told, even Trump, they're told, yeah, this is real. Here's the videos. Take a look at the videos. They look pretty cool. I don't know if they're real or whatever. And we really don't know where they're coming from. The more I look at it, the more I think there may be a couple of people who understand the consciousness link. But when you start seeing, like, as I described, when Terry Lovelace says, I go inside the craft and it's the size of a football stadium on the inside, I don't care what Greer says. We ain't got that kind of technology. There's no way we got that kind of stuff. It's this manipulation of consciousness that you're seeing there.
But what your answer means to me is that the CSA director is providing political cover for the president by asserting he's out of the loop, and therefore it's part of the plausible deniability.
Yeah, and they would feed him. They would try to set him, because that's what they do. They're not going to kill you. Like Greer always makes us maintain they're going to kill him. That's not what you do. If Chase Brandon, who was the CIA guy for Hollywood, the way he described how you do it. So if you're making a movie about the CIA, I come, hey Joe, I hear you're making a movie about the CIA. Is that true? Yeah. Hey, have you ever been to the CIA? No. You'd like to go to CIA? We take you there and we can show you how it works. And that would give you some ideas to put in your movie and stuff like that. And what you do is you like somebody who's begging on the street. You walk beside the guy. You don't confront them face to face. You walk beside him and you sort of direct them in the way you want to go. And I remember the one witness, the one that was the most damaging was the guy who claimed was the and I can't remember what he claimed. It was one of these things that they've got the crafts. I can't remember. He appeared, I think it was at that 1997 congressional thing that he had there. And the guy came, and 5 minutes before he says to Greer, "Oh, I've been threatened. I'm pulling out." So
I met that individual. I know exactly.
Okay, yeah, so he never went under oath. He just before he went under oath, he backed out, but Greer kept telling his story. And that's the thing. So the guy came in, he told the story, but he never told it under oath. And that's the thing where it would make sense that they would be putting in all sorts of stuff into Greer, because that's what you want to do. You don't want to destroy him. You just want to put so much junk that he can't tell what's true and what's not true.
And in the process, he becomes ridiculous.
Yeah.
This was the hardest thing for me to experience. The leader of our contact network in the 90s, high ideals, he is in a position now of influencing large numbers of people to go out and do contact, which is a good thing, but also he appears ridiculous to the larger society, as well as the UFO community, by making assertions that are so absurd that only a fool or a madman would believe them to be true.
And it worked. It worked in terms of Greer. I mean, even the stuff when I went to the Clinton library, and I was looking for the Greer briefing, because he would say he gave the briefing to, the Clinton's friend. And he said he doesn't want to end up like Jack Kennedy, all that whole story. And I went there and I found the briefing was there, and it's like about 400 pages, but it's basically like 5 pages or 6 pages of Greer giving his idea of what's going on. And then also it's the documents. And on the very top in pencil, it said, "President did not read," on top of the document. And that's the thing. So he was always maintaining that he was briefing people, that he's putting stuff through, like to Obama through Podesta and stuff like that. But what he calls as a briefing is not a briefing. A briefing is when you go in and you have a clearance, and the guy, signs a piece of paper and he's cleared, and you give him the briefing, and then you walk out and it's done at a skiff. Greer keeps using the wrong words that make it sound like, he's briefing the president of the United States. He's providing a bunch of material to the president of the United States that the president may not even be reading.
Yeah. I mean that there's,
but he still has done a lot of raising of consciousness, because a lot of the stuff he said turned out to be true. Like the briefing of Wilson turned out to be true. The briefing of the DIA director turned out to be true. The briefing of Woolsey turned out to be true, and Woolsey was denying it. And Hal Puthoff came and told me not to run the story about Woolsey. He was friends of Woolsey, and this would destroy him and stuff like that. But Woolsey was lying through his teeth, and it turned out that Greer was telling the truth, that he actually did. But then he called it a briefing, and it wasn't a briefing. He was sitting there talking to him. But a briefing is an official act that Greer can't do, because he's not in the government. So he used some bad words, but he did move the ball down the field a little bit. I'll give him credit for that.
The nature of disinformation is that the best disinformer gives out a combination of accurate information and some outrageous, if you can't blind them with brilliance, you blind them with bullshit.
Yeah. And Woolsey actually came out maybe 2 years ago or so on the Black Vault with John Greenwald, and said, something like that basically happened, that he did meet with Greer for a few hours, and they sat down and they talked about UFOs. But you're right in the terminology that he's using in briefing, compared to preparing and providing certain information. One kind of
The interesting part of the story there was that Wosley and his wife had a sighting. That's the part of the story people leave out. They had a daylight sighting, and they're in down the rabbit hole. So that was when Greer told the story. He was in Colorado Springs, I believe, and that's when I guess someone came up to him and said, it was what's his name from the Arlington Institute, and said,
Peterson.
Wosley, we got someone who can help you. And he said, well, who would that be? And he said, the CI director. And that's when they brought him in. And so it appeared that Wosley wanted information, and Greer was brought in, and because he was an experiencer, and that's what people forget, that a lot of these people are experiencers. Like Nolan's an experiencer, and Eric Davis is an experiencer, and Hal Puthoff's kid is an experiencer, and you start wondering like how much
Tim
of
Taylor,
this is a big play, that all these people are in it because they're like Jacques Vallée, 1955 sighting. It's like everybody goes down the rabbit hole, and it's everybody's just trying to figure it out for themselves. And it may be the manipulation of these people by the phenomena that it says, okay, now it's time for Jacques Vallée to have a sighting, and we'll get him going, and then we'll give James a sighting, and James is going to open up a podcast, and they give me my sighting, and that's if it's multiple lives, then you start looking at this thing that we may have planned to do this whole thing. We may have had this meeting before we were born and said, okay, Joe, you're going to do this, and James, you're going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and we're going to raise consciousness, and it may be that kind of thing that we're just assuming it's one life, and we got to figure it all out here, and we got to get like we got to have everything yesterday and all this kind of stuff, that it may be much more, and it is much more complex than what we think it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, that makes it fun and engaging, right? But there is a great quote by Peter Levenda, and he said, I'm going to paraphrase, the kind of after effects, or the results of contact are so profound that they don't appear as a side effect, but more like the main point of the whole thing. Basically saying like the experience, the contact experience itself is one thing, but the after effects are so potent that it seemed like that was the intention from the beginning.
And we could learn from that, because it has this absurd characteristic. And that's why I say with the theory of wow, that unless it's absurd, unless it's really weird, you're just going to slough it off. If it's weird, then you're going like, what is going on here? And it's almost like a thing where they are able to manipulate our thought to put us down the rabbit hole where we can't come out. Same as the near-death experience, where you see people that get divorced and their whole life falls apart, and their kids. I've got two women, I mean, where they're not allowed to see their grandkids, and they won't back off. They're going to tell their story. The one, Sir Sherry Wild, you probably know, her kids got in a court injunction to stop her from publishing the book, and yet people will not back off. And I think it's got to do with this absurd characteristic of the sighting, that they know exactly how to get you interested and down so that you are enthralled with it, and you just can't let it go. You see it over and over again in ufology. People just cannot let it go.
Going full circle in terms of our discussion, we started off with the virtual experience model. And one of the conditions of the model that I put forward is a virtual experience of the third kind. Yeah. And not only can the intelligences associated with phenomena create screen memories, the entire so-called encounter abduction experience could be downloaded into your consciousness in a way that would seem as real as the memory you and I have for what we ate for breakfast this morning. So given this awesome mental capacity, the database that we rely on in ufology should be questioned. And we have to start asking better questions and not rely with confidence on the testimony that we believe represents physical experience, but be confident in the sense that it represents profoundly psychic experiences, which are real. And if what you say is true, that consciousness is primary, then a downloaded false memory into your consciousness is more real than your memory of what you had for breakfast, because its basis is from the very consciousness itself. That is the wellspring of creation.
Almost like deep.
People say, "Oh, it's not real." They implanted a false memory into my mind. But if consciousness is primary, that is in a sense more real than what you remember you had for breakfast.
Or even the idea that what we see is reality, and that's where you start looking at It was only like 1925 that we suddenly realized there was more than one galaxy. Before then, we really believed there was 5,000 stars. We believed the world was flat, the sun went around the earth, everything's solid, and wrong, and we're just wrong every time. And we believe what we see, and should tell us there is no red out there. That it's going into, and it's like, where's the screen? Where's the image happening? And you start to realize that it's all like people can say it's an illusion, and I always say, well, who the hell is that? You're just giving it a name. You're not explaining anything. And that's the problem, is that people describe experience, but they're not explaining experience. They're just sort of describing, this happens, this happens, this happens. It's almost like Moses opening the Red Sea. Okay, that's fantastic. Now, how did he do the trick? I mean, you explained how he did, but you didn't explain how he did it. You just described how he did it. And that's what we're doing in ufology. We're just describing this happens, but we're not really explaining anything. And that's where I think we got it. To me, you got to get as close to the phenomena, the intelligence as you can, to figure out who are they talking to? Are these prime contactees or whoever they are? And then spend time there, because I think some of them have tremendous amount of material that we could learn from, and they're all telling, like, I do the channel stuff or the stuff with the experiencers, and it's always the same thing. It's like oneness, love is the core of the universe, everything is alive, conscious, and connected. It's the same thing over and over and over again. It's that same message, and you start to realize maybe that is the message, and that this pursuit for physical stuff is the illusion. It's because in the end, it's all illusion. How do you know? Even Descartes said, people always say, well, you got to be skeptical in science, and they quote Descartes. Well, that's not what Descartes said. Descartes says you got to be skeptical of what you've learned. He said, I'm ready to throw out everything I ever learned. You got to be skeptical of the stuff you learned, that maybe what you learned is not right, and realize that maybe this new thing is something that can teach you something. And that's where we get stuck in the sighting stuff, where we were sort of keep describing it, and it's like grade one. It's like the grade one of the theory of wow, the UFOs with lights on them, and there's red ones and green ones, fast ones, slow ones, and it's like, and it's like, no, I don't want to go back. I've done this for 48 years. I'm not going to grade one again. I'm not going to do sightings again. We got to move on. We got to get past sightings and get to me is the intelligence, and the downloaded books and the stories that I've come across. I just can't keep up with the bizarre stories. It's almost like just like another world. I never would have believed this would have happened. Not in a million years. The disclosure and the bizarre stuff that surrounds me with these stories of people. In 75, it was very simple. You had a couple of UFOs, and they were flying around, and they were probably from another planet, and that was it. There was none of the weird stuff. There was no crop circles, no cattle mutilation. Cattle mutilation started shortly after that, but it was just a different world altogether.
You have to crawl before you walk, and you have to walk before you run, and you have to run before you fly. Yeah. So we're headed in the right direction.
I agree.
Understandable that you're tired of MUFON's approach, because you can just crawl for so many years, and you want to stand up.
Yeah, I think I think that, you mean to end the thing. That is true. I absolutely believe we are making headway in terms of what you're doing, what I'm doing, what Ray Hernandez is now writing about. And Chris Bledsoe has basically, given the whole thing up. And his daughter is another prime contactee. I don't know if you ever heard the interview with his daughter. It's like, wow, holy shit. I'm telling you what, you talk about a prime contactee with that girl. Holy cow. I tried to get it. I asked Chris for an interview. I haven't got it yet, but that's the thing is, to me, it's a magnificent world. It's when you look at it and you realize how magnificent it is, you just consider you got to do a gratitude meditation every day and say, thank you that we got to play in this Super Bowl, the biggest story of all times, if you understand what's actually going on. And we got to play in the game. Most people, as you probably know, live lives of quiet desperation. They have no clue what's going on. They're just paying the bills, or they're living in total poverty, and their children is their family or whatever. We got to play this game, and we should appreciate the fact that we got to play in the game and do the best job we can to bring it out, because it's not for everybody, because everybody's at their own level, but to whom much is given, much is expected.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we'll end it there, because we've been going on a long time here, but
we solved everything. We solved everything, James. You don't have to do any more shows. No more shows now. We solved it.
It's over. So does anybody have any parting words for the audience?
No,
I would say that Ray Hernandez's name came up. He's written a very important book. It's The Mind of God. It's not a religious tract. It instead is an explanation of why consciousness is primary. It's short. It's available. I also encourage people to get a hold of A Greater Reality, which is the companion book for The Mind of God. There's a 3 volumes edition. My article is in the 2nd volume. So look up Ray Hernandez or on the internet, and you can get a hold of some of that material.
Yeah, that's leading thought. Because he's in with academics and stuff, and he's on the leading edge of where I think this thing is going. And talk about a flip of a guy. His original story, his story where 2 hours a day he was sleeping and his wife was ready to get rid of him, and I mean he was just like flipped upside down when this happened to him. And my parting words would always be the same thing: is just for people to recognize the fact that this is the potentially the biggest story of all times, to understand not so much the story, but what it means. The fact that we are eternal, that consciousness is primary, and the fact that we are living like at the time of Christ or the signing of the Constitution. And 500 years from now, I used to tell Angela Joyner, because she fought for the Stevensville witnesses, and her newspaper is the biggest newspaper they ever published, was her UFO story. And they told her after 3 days, they said, "Okay, Angela, get back to work. Enough of this." And she said, "Well, they're still phoning me. I don't care. Just get back to work. You got to do the front page story. You got to do the court report and some other story she had to do." And she said, "Well, what do I do with them?" They said, "Ignore them." And so she told the people to phone her at home. And then they heard her having a conversation with the Dallas Morning Star or whatever, and Dallas Morning News, and they thought she was applying for a job, and they put up her computer and her Rolodex in a box, and she walked in the room and she said, "Oh, we decided to part ways." I said, "No, Angela, in Canada, when they put your computer and a Rolodex in a box, cardboard box, and tell you to leave, that's called getting fired." She never worked as a reporter full-time again. It ruined her life. But I said, "Angela, 500 years from now, your great-great-great-grandchildren will say Angela Joyner was my relative, and I'm proud of what she did," because we live in a historic time. And it's this important idea of why we're actually here, what's actually going on. It's really got nothing to do with UFOs. I think everybody's going to agree on this on the end, that it's not the UFO the way we think it is. It's a much deeper, more involved story, and it has to do with reality, how the world is structured, the mind of God, whatever you want to call it. And the people on this broadcast and the people who listen are the choir, and we should recognize the fact that too much is given, much expected, that we are living and have knowledge that we can share with other people that will help the world and raise consciousness. Because in the end, when the consciousness gets raised, like any other social or political movement, the people will make the right decision.
Amen.
And when the people lead, the leaders will follow.
There we go.
Yeah. Well, that's what they told Greer, isn't that that Republican guy said to Greer? He says, "I'm 100% for you, Steve. I'm 100%, but we get killed if we went out with this. You get the parade going, and then we'll lead the parade." There was that guy that was after Hillary. He told Stephen, I remember that story. "You get the parade going, and then we'll lead the parade." And that's always the way it is. Politicians put their finger up, see which way the wind is blowing. And or people would say to me, "Oh, Hillary doesn't want to talk. She won't answer questions." I said, "Sure she will." I said, "You just do what Paul Davids did. You pay $1,000 for a breakfast at a Hampton place in the Hamptons, and both you go there, or you go to a $33,000 a plate dinner, and you walk up and ask her Hillary Clinton a UFO question. She'll answer it. You're not giving her any money. Why would she answer? She's answering to the people who are giving her the billions of dollars that she needs to run for president. That's what it's all about. Is whoever's paying the bills gets their questions answered, and people don't understand that. They figure that we should get it because it's a good idea. Childhood cancer is a good idea. It doesn't mean that everybody should stop and do childhood cancer. We still got to do some work to get it to go.
Yeah. So thank you so much, guys, for coming on. We'll probably do this again sometime.
Okay.
Even though it's
we'll
all
quiz
over.
you. We'll quiz you about your experience, because
Yeah.
you're one of the experiencers that's got this stuff. I mean, I've got some stuff out of you, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great
We'll talk sometime. We'll talk about it sometime. But
you
thank
got to
so
get
much.
out of the closet, as the one guy said. Closets are for clothes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's,
You talked about it quite a bit, so
yeah. All right. Thank you,
Good.
guys. And
Thanks for
we'll
what
speak
you
again
do.
soon. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Okay.